What happens when the one woman hired to find a duke, his perfect bride, becomes the only person he'll never let go? This is a story of survival, rebellion, and a love that threatens to burn down an entire empire built on lies. Stay until the end to see how one desperate decision changes everything. And if you're watching from London, New York, or anywhere in between, drop your city in the comments and smash that like button. You won't believe where this goes. The rejection letter arrived on a Thursday. Elara Whitcomb held it between ink-stained fingers, reading the same three sentences over and over until the words blurred into meaningless shapes. Regret to inform, insufficient funds, immediate payment required. The paper trembled, not from the autumn wind slipping through the cracked window of her father's study, but from the weight of what it meant. Ruin. Complete and total ruin. She set the letter down carefully, as if it might shatter, and stared at the mess surrounding her. Ledgers sprawled across the mahogany desk like casualties of war, red ink everywhere. Her father's textile business, 3 generations of Whitcomb labor, sweat, and pride, was drowning in debt so deep no amount of clever bookkeeping could save it. The numbers didn't lie, even when she wanted them to. Elara? Her father's voice drifted from the sitting room, weak and crackling like old parchment. He didn't know yet. Couldn't know. The man had already buried a wife and 2 sons. This business was all he had left besides her, and she'd be damned if she let him watch it die too. She straightened her spine, smoothed her plain gray dress, and forced her face into something resembling calm. Just reviewing the accounts, Papa. Nothing to worry about. Nothing except everything. The lie tasted bitter, but lies were currency in this world. She'd learned that young. In a society where your worth was measured in bloodline and bank accounts, truth was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. She was a Whitcomb, yes, gentry by name, but her mother's common blood and her father's failing fortune had long since stripped that name of its shine. The grand families didn't invite her to their balls. The eligible bachelors didn't seek her hand. She existed in that gray space between worlds, too refined for the working class, too poor for the elite. So she'd built her own currency, information. For 3 years, Elara had quietly established herself as something new in London's rigid social landscape, a matchmaker. Not the crude, gossiping kind that haunted drawing rooms and tea parties, but a professional, discreet, effective. She studied people the way scholars studied texts, reading between polite smiles and practiced manners to find the truth underneath. She knew who needed money, who needed status, who needed escape, and she knew how to bring the right desperate people together. It paid. Not well enough to save her father's business, but enough to keep them fed. Until now. The brass clock on the mantel struck 4, each chime a small hammer against her skull. She had until the end of the month. 3 weeks to produce a miracle or watch everything collapse. The knock at the door came like an answer to a prayer she hadn't prayed. Elara's maid, really more of a neighbor girl they paid in leftover fabric, appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "Miss Whitcomb, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says it's urgent business." "What kind of gentleman?" "The expensive kind, miss. Got a carriage with actual matching horses and everything." Elara's heart kicked against her ribs. Expensive meant opportunity. Expensive meant desperate. And desperate people paid well. She checked her reflection in the tarnished mirror above the desk. Pale skin, sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled back in a simple knot. Professional. Unremarkable. Perfect. In this line of work, being memorable was a liability. "Show him to the drawing room. Offer tea." "We don't have any good tea, miss." "Then offer the bad tea in the good cups." The girl scurried off. Elara gathered the ledgers, shoved them in a drawer, and took 3 slow breaths. Whatever this was, she needed it. Needed it so badly her hands were shaking. She found him standing by the window, back turned, examining the threadbare curtains with an expression she couldn't read. Tall, broad shoulders beneath an immaculate black coat. Dark hair just slightly too long to be fashionable. Everything about him screamed money and breeding, from his polished boots to the way he held himself, like a man who'd never questioned his right to take up space. "Mr.—" He turned, and Elara's practiced composure nearly cracked. She knew this face. Everyone in London knew this face, even if they'd never seen it in person. Sharp features, cold gray eyes, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. The newspapers called him the Iron Duke for his ruthless business dealings and his complete lack of interest in society's games. Rowan Halstead, Duke of Ashmont, one of the wealthiest, most powerful, most notoriously difficult men in England, and he was standing in her shabby drawing room. Miss Whitcomb. His voice was low, measured, with an edge that suggested he didn't waste words. I need your services. She gestured to the worn sofa. Please sit, though I confess I'm surprised. Men of your position don't typically seek out matchmakers. Men of my position are typically idiots. He sat, but his posture remained rigid. I've wasted 2 years attending balls and dinner parties, enduring the parade of ambitious mothers and their daughters. Every woman presented to me as the same. Perfect manners, perfect smiles, perfect lies. And you want something different. I want someone real. He said it like a challenge. Can you provide that, Miss Whitcomb, or is this a waste of both our time? Elara studied him carefully. This was a test. Men like Rowan Halstead didn't walk into strange houses without doing research first. He knew about her, knew her reputation for discretion and results. This meeting was already a negotiation, and she was 3 steps behind. That depends, she said slowly, on whether you're actually ready for real. Most people say they want truth until it's staring them in the face. Then they prefer the comfortable lie. Something flickered in those gray eyes, surprise maybe, or recognition. I'm not most people. No, you're a duke who's rejected every suitable woman in London, alienated half the peerage, and earned a reputation for being impossible to please, which means you're either a fool or you're looking for something that doesn't exist in your world. The silence stretched like a wire pulled taut. Then Rowan Halstead smiled. It was small, sharp, and completely genuine. You're hired. I haven't agreed to take the job. Name your price. And there it was, the moment that would either save her or destroy her. Elara's mind raced through calculations, the debt, the timeline, what she needed versus what she could ask for. If she aimed too low, she'd look desperate, too high, and he'd walk. She had one shot. 5,000 pounds. His expression didn't change. That's absurd. That's the price of honesty, Your Grace. If you want someone to parade beautiful women in front of you and tell you what you want to hear, there are cheaper options. If you want me to find you a real match, someone who'll challenge you, see through your armor, and not bore you to death within a year, it will cost you 5,000 pounds, plus expenses. 3,000. 4,000 with half paid up front, and I maintain full control of the selection process. You don't interfere with my methods. I decide when I'm satisfied. Obviously. Rowan stood, crossed to her in 3 strides, and extended his hand. You have until the end of the social season, 4 months. If you fail, you return the advance. Elara's throat went dry. 4 months. The end of the season. It was enough time, barely, but the stakes. If she failed, returning 2,000 pounds would destroy her. But if she succeeded, she gripped his hand. His palm was warm, calloused in unexpected places. Not the soft hands of a man who'd never worked. I don't fail, Your Grace. We'll see. He released her hand, pulled a card from his coat, and set it on the table beside the untouched tea. My secretary's information. Coordinate through him. I expect your first candidate within the week. 1 week isn't enough time to... Then I suggest you work quickly, Miss Whitcomb. He was at the door before she could respond, moving with the kind of decisive efficiency that probably terrified his servants. He paused at the threshold, glanced back. One more thing. If I discover you've wasted my time with the same polished performances I've endured elsewhere, this arrangement ends immediately. I meant what I said. I want real. Prove you can deliver it. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut with soft finality. Elara sank onto the sofa, legs suddenly unsteady. Her maid appeared from wherever she'd been hiding, eyes huge. Miss, was that really? Yes. And did he just? Yes. Mother Mary, we're going to be rich. We're going to be dead if I can't pull this off. Elara pressed her hands to her face, trying to calm the frantic beating of her heart. 2,000 pounds, in her hands, within the week. Enough to pay off the most pressing debts, buy time for the rest, save her father from the shame of bankruptcy. All she had to do was find an impossible duke, his perfect bride. No pressure. She stood, crossed to the desk, and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. The card Rowan had left bore an address in Mayfair, of course it did, and a name. Mr. Samuel Pritchard, private secretary. She'd start there. Background information. The Duke's habits, preferences, social circle. What had failed before and why. But even as she began to sketch out her strategy, something nagged at her. The way Rowan had looked at her. That test in his voice. I want someone real. What the hell did that even mean? Real wasn't something that existed in his world. Real was messy. Real was struggling to pay rent and watering down soup to make it last another day. Real was the sharp edge of survival that men like him never touched. What he wanted was an illusion that felt authentic, a performance so good he couldn't see the seams. Fine. She could do that. She'd spent her whole life performing. The next week passed in a blur of research and careful manipulation. Elara sent letters, called in favors, interviewed sources. She built a profile of Rowan Halstead that went deeper than the newspaper's Iron Duke nickname. What she found was complicated. On the surface, he was exactly what everyone said: cold, exacting, impossible to please. He'd inherited the dukedom young after his father's sudden death, and he'd spent the last decade turning the family's respectable fortune into something obscene. He owned factories, railroads, shipping companies. He worked constantly, attended Parliament religiously, and showed up to social functions only when absolutely required. But there were gaps in the story. Strange absences. Money that moved in directions that didn't make sense. Twice a week, his carriage traveled to an unfashionable part of the city and returned hours later. No one knew why. Elara filed that detail away. Everyone had secrets. The trick was knowing which ones mattered. For her first candidate, she chose Lady Catherine Hartley. 23, intelligent, beautiful in that classic English rose way that photographed well. More importantly, Catherine was quietly miserable in her current engagement to a viscount twice her age. She'd jump at the chance to escape, and she had the breeding and grace to handle a duke. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday at the Duke's London residence. Elara arrived early, was shown to a drawing room the size of her entire house, and waited. Rowan appeared exactly on time, followed by Lady Catherine and her nervous mother. The Duchess candidate looked perfect. Hair styled in the latest fashion, dress cut to showcase her figure without being scandalous, smile practiced but warm. Elara watched from her position by the window as introductions were made. She'd coached Catherine carefully. Be yourself, but the best version. Ask him about his business interests. Show intelligence without threatening his ego. Laugh, but not too much. Catherine executed it flawlessly, and Rowan looked bored within 10 minutes. He let the conversation run its polite course, asked appropriate questions, gave nothing away. When the hour ended, he stood, thanked Lady Catherine for her time, and showed them out with perfect courtesy. Then he turned to Elara. No. That's it? Just no? She's lovely, accomplished, exactly what I expected. His tone made it sound like an insult. She's also performing every word. I could see her mentally checking boxes. Smile here, laugh there, show interest in trains. It was exhausting. She's 23 years old, meeting a duke. Of course she's nervous. Nervous I can work with. Fake I cannot. He crossed to a side table, poured himself whiskey without offering her any. Try again, Miss Whitcomb, and this time find me someone who can forget I'm a duke for 5 consecutive minutes. Elara bit back 3 separate responses, all of them sharp enough to end the contract. That's not how this works. You're asking me to find you someone who can ignore the most fundamental fact of who you are. Your title, your wealth, your position, that's not background noise. That's you. No. He turned, pinned her with those cold gray eyes. That's what everyone else has decided I am. I'm asking you to find someone who can see past it. And what exactly is past it, Your Grace? The question hung in the air between them, heavier than she'd intended. For a moment something shifted in his expression, something raw, and quickly shuddered. I suppose that's what we're both trying to find out. He dismissed her after that, and Elara left feeling like she'd just failed a test she didn't know she was taking. Candidate 2 was worse. Lady Margaret Thorne, brilliant, well-read, capable of debating philosophy and politics with actual depth. Rowan engaged with her properly this time, seemed almost interested. But 15 minutes in, Elara watched Margaret catch herself mid-argument, soften her position, defer to the Duke's opinion even though she'd been making the stronger point. No, Rowan said afterward. She was winning, and she stopped herself. Why? Because that's what women are taught to do, Elara shot back, frustration bleeding through her professional mask. You want someone real? Then you need to accept that real women in this society have learned to dim themselves to survive. It's not performance, Your Grace. It's armor. Then find me someone brave enough to take it off. 3 candidates, 4, 5. Each one carefully selected, each one rejected. Lady Anne was too eager to please. Miss Josephine spoke and rehearsed poetry. The widow Mrs. Hartford was interesting until she mentioned how much she admired his late father, a man Rowan apparently despised. By the 6th rejection, Elara's advance was half spent on expenses, and she was no closer to understanding what this impossible man actually wanted. She confronted him in his study on a gray morning 2 months into the contract. Propriety be damned. You're sabotaging this. Rowan looked up from the papers scattered across his desk. Excuse me? Every woman I bring you is accomplished, intelligent, and perfectly suitable. You reject them for reasons that make no sense. Lady Anne was too eager. She was being polite. Miss Josephine spoke poetically. She was nervous. You're creating impossible standards because you don't actually want to get married. You want to prove that no one is good enough. He set down his pen carefully. Are you finished? No, I think you hired me because you knew I'd fail. It's safe. You can tell yourself you tried, but the real problem is that you're... Come with me. What? Come with me. He stood, grabbed his coat. If you're going to accuse me of self-sabotage, the least I can do is show you why you're wrong. Elara's professional instincts screamed at her to refuse. This was inappropriate, dangerous. Dukes didn't invite unmarried women on mysterious excursions, and smart matchmakers didn't accept. But she followed him anyway. His carriage took them east, away from Mayfair's polished streets into neighborhoods that grew progressively rougher. The buildings here leaned like drunk men, windows dark or broken, streets narrow enough that the carriage barely fit. Elara had lived poor, but never this poor. This was the London the newspapers pretended didn't exist. Rowan led her to a building that might have been a warehouse once, now converted into something else. He unlocked the door himself. No servants, no fanfare, and gestured her inside. What she saw stopped her cold. Books, everywhere. Shelves improvised from scrap wood, lined with volumes in varying states of repair. Tables surrounded by mismatched chairs. A chalkboard at the front covered in neat handwriting, and people. Dozens of them. Men in worn work clothes, women with calloused hands and tired eyes. Young people who should have been in factories, but were here instead, reading. A school? She breathed. A reading circle. Rowan's voice was quieter here, almost reverent. Started it 7 years ago. Twice a week, anyone can come. We teach reading, writing, mathematics, discuss books, ideas, things they'd never have access to otherwise. A woman approached, older, gray-haired, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of hard labor. Your Grace, we weren't expecting you today. Just showing a colleague around, Mrs. Patterson. Carry on. The woman's eyes flicked to Elara with sharp curiosity, but she nodded and returned to the group she'd been helping. Elara walked deeper into the space, unable to fully process what she was seeing. This wasn't charity for show. There were no reporters, no society witnesses to applaud the Duke's generosity. This was real, secret, the kind of thing that could damage his reputation if the wrong people found out. Teaching the lower classes to read and think for themselves? The peerage would call it dangerous, radical, a threat to the natural order. Why? She finally asked. Rowan stood by a shelf, running his fingers along book spines like old friends. My father believed people had their place. Workers should work, nobles should rule, Education was wasted on those not born to use it. He spent his whole life maintaining that system, and it made him— He paused, jaw tight. It made him cruel, small. I watched him destroy people for trying to rise above their station, and I decided I didn't want to be him. So you built this. So I built this. He pulled out a book, a battered copy of Frankenstein, and held it like it meant something. Everyone here has something none of those women you've paraded before me have ever needed: hunger. They want to learn. They want to grow. They don't pretend to be something they're not because they don't have that luxury. And every conversation I have here is more real than anything I've experienced at 100 society dinners. Elara's throat tightened. She'd been so focused on finding him a perfect bride, she'd completely missed what he was actually searching for. Not beauty or breeding or even compatibility. Truth. Raw, unpolished, desperate truth. The kind of truth she'd built her entire life hiding. "I write," she said suddenly. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Essays about women's education, property rights, published anonymously because if anyone knew it was me, I'd be ruined. No one would hire me. My father would be shamed. So I perform. Every day, I put on the costume of a proper woman who knows her place, and I hate every second of it. Rowan turned slowly, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression was completely unguarded. "What name do you publish under?" "E. Thornfield." His eyes widened. "The E. Thornfield? Who wrote The Cage of Courtesy?" "I've read that. I've quoted that." "I know. I saw it referenced in your speech to Parliament last year. You got the quote slightly wrong, but the intention was right." A smile broke across his face, genuine, startled, transforming him into someone younger and infinitely more human. "You've been lying to me. Everyone lies to you. That's what you pay for." "No, that's what I paid to escape." He set the book down, crossed to her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. This is what I want. Someone who can stand here and call me out, who has their own fire, their own fight. I'm your matchmaker, Your Grace, not a candidate." "Maybe you should be." The air between them felt electric, dangerous. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was a line, a clear, unmistakable line that would change everything if crossed. She stepped back. "I have a job to do. Let me do it." The spell broke. Rowan's professional mask slid back into place, but something remained in his eyes, a question, or maybe a promise. "One more candidate," he said. "Choose carefully, Miss Whitcomb. We're running out of time." Elara left the reading circle feeling like she'd just survived something. Her hands shook the whole carriage ride home. This wasn't about money anymore. Wasn't even about survival. Somewhere in the last 2 months, it had become about him. About that flash of vulnerability in a man who'd learned to armor himself against the world. About the impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, someone like her could matter to someone like him. But she had a contract to fulfill. And she had one candidate left. She'd make it count. The 7th candidate's name was Victoria Ashford, and she was everything Elara had been avoiding. Not a lady, not gentry, not even remotely acceptable by the standards of polite society. Victoria ran a printing press in Southwark, wore ink-stained aprons over plain cotton dresses, and had opinions about workers' rights that would make half of Parliament choke on their brandy. She was also the smartest woman Elara had ever met. They sat across from each other in a cramped coffeehouse that smelled of burned beans and damp wool, Victoria's sharp green eyes assessing Elara with the same careful attention Elara usually reserved for her clients. "Let me understand this correctly," Victoria said, stirring sugar into her cup with methodical precision. "You want me to pretend to court a duke?" "Not pretend. Actually meet him. Have a conversation. See if there's compatibility?" Victoria's laugh was short and bitter. "Between a man who owns half of London and a woman who can barely afford rent? You're either desperate or delusional, Miss Whitcomb." "I'm betting desperate." Elara had prepared for this resistance, had rehearsed careful arguments about opportunity and social mobility. But sitting here, watching Victoria's calloused fingers wrap around the chipped cup, all her polished words felt obscene. "You're right," she said instead. "I am desperate. And this is probably a terrible idea, but I've watched him reject 6 perfect candidates for not being real enough, And then I saw his secret reading circle where he teaches people exactly like you. And I thought, she stopped, shook her head. I don't know what I thought. That maybe he actually meant it. That maybe someone like him could see past the surface long enough to recognize substance when it's staring him in the face. Victoria set down her cup. The Duke of Ashmont runs a reading circle in Whitechapel twice a week. Has been for 7 years. I know that circle. Victoria's voice went quiet. My brother attended for 2 years before he died. Learned to read there. It changed his life. She looked at Elara with something that might have been respect or might have been suspicion. Why would you tell me this? If it's meant to be secret, because I need you to understand what you'd be walking into. He's not like the others. He's complicated and difficult, and he'll see through any performance in about 30 seconds. But he's also the only member of the peerage I've ever met who actually gives a damn about people who weren't born with titles. And you think that means he'd be interested in me? I think he might be. If you're willing to try. Victoria studied her for a long moment. What's in it for you? Really? The truth sat on Elara's tongue like a stone. Everything, my father's business, our home, my entire future. But admitting that felt like weakness, and she'd learned young that showing weakness to strangers was the fastest way to get hurt. Standard commission, she said instead. If you marry him, I get paid. And if I don't, then I'm bankrupt by spring. The honesty seemed to satisfy something in Victoria. She nodded slowly. All right, I'll meet your Duke. But Miss Whitcomb, I won't lie about who I am. I won't soften my edges or pretend to be something I'm not. If that's a problem, we should end this now. That's exactly what he asked for. Then I suppose we'll find out if he meant it. The meeting was set for the following afternoon at Rowan's residence. Elara arrived early, pacing the drawing room like a caged animal. Everything hinged on this. If Victoria and Rowan didn't connect, she was finished. The advance money was gone, spent on candidates and research and keeping her father's creditors at bay for another month. She had nothing left to bargain with. Rowan entered exactly on time, took one look at her face and paused. You're nervous. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar when you're actually worried. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Who is she? Someone different. That's not an answer. You'll see soon enough. The clock ticked. Elara's palms were sweating. This was a mistake. She should have found another lady, someone safe, someone the Duke's peers would accept. Bringing Victoria here was professional suicide. If word got out that she'd tried to match a Duke with a common printer, her reputation would be destroyed. No one would hire her. She'd be a laughingstock. The door opened. Victoria walked in wearing her best dress, which was still obviously cheap, the fabric worn at the elbows, and no jewelry except a simple watch chain. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical knot, her expression carefully neutral. She looked exactly like what she was, a working woman who'd been dragged into a world that didn't want her. Rowan's eyebrows rose fractionally. He glanced at Elara, something like amusement flickering in his gray eyes, then turned to Victoria. Miss Ashford, thank you for coming. Your Grace. Victoria's curtsy was technically correct, but utterly lacking in grace. I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure why I'm here. That makes two of us. He gestured to the sofa. Please sit. Would you like tea? I'd rather not waste time on pleasantries. Victoria sat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. Miss Whitcomb says you're looking for someone real. I'm as real as they come, but I'm also completely unsuitable for your world. So perhaps we should establish right now whether this is a genuine meeting or an elaborate joke. The silence that followed was so sharp, Elara could feel it cutting. Then Rowan smiled. Actually smiled, wide and genuine. Miss Ashford, I think you might be my favorite person I've met all year. And no, this isn't a joke, though I'll confess I'm curious what Miss Whitcomb told you about me. That you reject perfect women for breathing wrong, that you run a secret reading circle in Whitechapel, that you're either the most principled aristocrat in England or the most bored. Victoria tilted her head. I'm leaning toward principled, but it's early yet. Fair assessment. Rowan sat across from her, leaning forward slightly. Tell me about your work. I run a printing press. We produce pamphlets, broadsides, the occasional book when we can afford the paper. Mostly political content that gets me threatening letters from people who think women shouldn't have opinions. What kind of political content? Workers' rights, fair wages, the radical notion that maybe people shouldn't starve while their employers buy third estates. She said it without apology, watching his face carefully. I imagine that makes you uncomfortable. It makes me interested. I own factories, Miss Ashford. I see what happens when profit is the only consideration. It's not pretty. Then why not change it? I'm trying, though it's like turning a ship with a teaspoon. The system resists reform. Systems resist everything until they break. Victoria's voice sharpened. Forgive me, Your Grace, but I've heard aristocrats talk about reform my whole life. It's always someday. Always after the next election or the next session of Parliament. Meanwhile, people die. Children work 16-hour days, families sleep 5 to a room. Your good intentions don't pay rent. Elara's breath caught. This was it. The moment where Rowan would remember he was a duke and Victoria was nobody. And this entire insane gamble would collapse. But Rowan just nodded slowly. You're right. Intentions are worthless without action. So what would you do? If you had my resources and position, how would you fix it? And Victoria told him. For the next hour, Elara watched something she'd never seen in any of the previous meetings. Not performance, not careful dancing around sensitive topics. Just two people arguing passionately about labor laws and factory conditions, and whether gradual reform or radical change was the path forward. They disagreed on half the points. Victoria called Rowan naive. Rowan called Victoria idealistic. Neither backed down. It was messy and loud and completely inappropriate. It was also the most honest conversation Elara had ever witnessed in a drawing room. When Victoria finally left, with a handshake instead of a curtsy, because of course she did, Elara stood frozen, afraid to ask, afraid to hope. Rowan turned to her, expression unreadable. She's extraordinary. So you'll see her again? Absolutely not. The words hit like a fist. What? Why? Because I'd ruin her life. He crossed to his desk, poured whiskey with hands that weren't quite steady. Did you see how people looked at her when she walked through the entrance hall? My staff, my neighbors watching from their windows. She's already being judged, and she's been in this house for an hour. If I actually courted her, it would be open season. The gossip, the cruelty. They'd tear her apart for sport. She can handle it. She shouldn't have to. The volume of his voice shocked them both. Rowan stopped, took a breath, continued more quietly. I asked you to find me someone real. You did. Congratulations. But I won't use that as an excuse to destroy a good woman's life just because I'm tired of polite society. Find me someone else. There is no one else, Elara's control finally snapped. 7 candidates, Your Grace. 7 brilliant, accomplished women who weren't good enough because they had the audacity to care what people think. You want real? Victoria Ashford is real. She's also the bravest person I've ever met, because she showed up here knowing exactly how people would judge her, and she did it anyway. And you're going to reject her because protecting her from gossip is easier than actually fighting for something that matters? You don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly. You want to be different from your father, but you're still playing by his rules, still letting society dictate your choices, still choosing safety over substance. She grabbed her papers, shoved them in her bag. I'm done. Find yourself another matchmaker, one who's better at finding you comfortable lies. She made it to the door before his voice stopped her. I went to the reading circle yesterday. Elara turned slowly. Rowan stood by the window, backlit by gray afternoon light. There's a boy there, Thomas, 14 years old, works in one of my textile factories during the day, comes to the circle at night to learn mathematics. Smart as hell, asked me yesterday why we couldn't implement rotating shifts so workers could sleep proper hours. He paused. His sister died last month, fell asleep at her loom, 16 years old, hadn't slept in 30 hours. The air felt too thick to breathe. I own that factory, Rowan continued. I sign off on the production quotas. I profit from those hours. And that boy looked at me like I could fix it, like my title meant I had the power to make his sister's death mean something. Do you know what I told him? Elara shook her head. that I'd try, that I'd bring it to the board, propose reforms. But I knew, even as I said it, that the board would vote me down, that profit margins matter more than dead girls, and he knew it too. I could see it in his eyes. Rowan turned to face her fully. I don't reject women because they're not good enough, Miss Whitcomb. I reject them because I'm not, because I can't look at someone like Victoria and pretend I deserve her respect when I'm complicit in the system that grinds people like her into dust. The confession hung between them, raw and terrible. Then change it, Elara said quietly. Stop making excuses and actually change it. One man can't, one man can start. That's what you told Thomas, isn't it? That you'd try? She moved closer, anger giving way to something more desperate. You have power, money, influence. Use it. Fight the board. Go public. Make it a scandal. Force their hand. And if I fail, if I lose everything in the process, then at least you'll fail honestly instead of hiding behind propriety while people die. The words seemed to hit him physically. He stared at her like he was seeing something new, something that frightened him. You really believe that? I have to, because I'm already ruined if this doesn't work, so I might as well burn down believing in something. She held his gaze. See Victoria again. Fight for those reforms. Stop waiting for permission to be the man you pretend to be twice a week in Whitechapel. Or don't. Keep rejecting everyone and everything until you die alone and respectable. Your choice. She left before he could respond, before her own bravado cracked and he saw how terrified she actually was. She'd just lectured a duke, told him his business, walked out on a contract that represented her only hope of survival. Professional suicide didn't begin to cover it. The carriage ride home was a blur. Elara's hand shook so badly she had to clasp them together. What had she done? What had she been thinking? Dukes didn't appreciate honesty. They appreciated deference. She'd just guaranteed that she'd never work in London again. Her father was in his study when she arrived, bent over ledgers he could barely see anymore. The late afternoon light carved deep shadows under his eyes. Papa. He looked up, managed a smile that broke her heart. How did the meeting go? Badly. Oh. He set down his pen. Well, perhaps the next one will be better. There wouldn't be a next one. They both knew it. The creditors were circling. The final notices had arrived. Without Rowan's contract, they had maybe 2 weeks before everything collapsed. Elara sat in the chair across from him, suddenly exhausted. I'm sorry. For what? For not being able to fix this. Her father reached across the desk, took her ink-stained hand in his gnarled one. You've been trying to fix things since your mother died, since your brothers. You were 12 years old, Elara, and you decided it was your job to hold this family together. That was never fair to you. I'm all you have left, and you're more than enough. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. He squeezed her hand gently. Stop carrying the world, my dear. It's too heavy for anyone. She wanted to cry, wanted to scream, wanted to rage at the unfairness of a world that punished people for being born without money. But tears were a luxury, and she'd learned to survive without luxuries. I should write, she said instead. The Gazette wants another essay. E. Thornfield rides again. Her father's smile was genuine this time. What's the topic? The lie of meritocracy, how society pretends anyone can rise through hard work while systematically destroying everyone who tries. Cheerful. Honest. She spent the rest of the evening at her desk, pouring her frustration and fear onto paper. The essay was sharper than usual, angrier. She wrote about dead girls at textile looms, about dukes who meant well but changed nothing, about matchmakers who sold hope they couldn't afford to believe in. She wrote until her hand cramped and the candle burned low. And then, just as she was sealing the envelope to send to her editor, someone knocked on the door. Late. Too late for social calls. Her father had gone to bed hours ago. Elara grabbed the fireplace poker, because London at night was dangerous and she wasn't stupid, and crept to the entrance. The man on her doorstep wore Rowan's livery. Message for Miss Whitcomb, from His Grace. The servant handed her a sealed letter and disappeared before she could ask questions. Elara broke the seal with trembling fingers. The note was short, written in Rowan's precise handwriting. I've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow, proposing the 8-hour workday, rotating shifts, and safety standards across all my holdings. They'll fight. I'll probably lose. But you were right. I'm tired of trying to be respectable. Also, I'd like to see Miss Ashford again, if she's willing. Elara read it 3 times, not quite believing. He'd actually listened, actually taken the risk. The board would destroy him for this. They'd call him a radical, a threat to proper business. He could lose control of his own companies. He was doing it anyway. She should have felt relieved, victorious even. This was what she'd demanded, but all she felt was a strange twist in her chest. Something between fear and pride, and an emotion she didn't want to examine too closely. The next morning, she visited Victoria's print shop. The woman was bent over a press, hands black with ink, hair escaping its knot in sweaty strands. She looked up when Elara entered, expression guarded. "Come to tell me I failed?" "Come to tell you he wants to see you again." Victoria's hand stilled on the press. "Why?" "Because you terrified him, and apparently he's decided to stop running from things that scare him." Elara pulled out Rowan's note, handed it over. "He's proposing labor reforms today, because of what you said to him." Victoria read the note slowly, lips moving slightly. When she looked up, her eyes were suspiciously bright. "My brother would have loved this, knowing someone actually listened. Will you see him again?" "On one condition." Victoria set the note down carefully. "No more performing. No pretending this is a normal courtship. If he wants me, he gets the real me. Ink stains, radical politics, and all. I wouldn't have it any other way." They shook on it. 2 women who understood exactly what it meant to survive in a world that didn't want them. Elara spent the rest of the day in a strange limbo, waiting for news from the board meeting. It came just after dark, not from Rowan, but from the newspapers. "Duke of Ashmont proposes radical labor reforms," screamed the headline. "Board votes down 8-hour workday. Conflict erupts." She bought 3 different papers. They all said the same thing. Rowan had proposed his reforms. The board had rejected them unanimously. And then the Duke of Ashmont had done something unprecedented. He'd threatened to go public, to air the company's labor practices in front of Parliament and the press, to force the issue even if it destroyed him in the process. The board had called his bluff. Rowan had made good on his threat. By morning, every newspaper in London was running exposés on working conditions in Ashmont Industries. 16-hour shifts, child labor, unsafe machinery, deaths that had been quietly buried. The scandal was massive, ugly, impossible to ignore. And Rowan was at the center of it, his reputation burning. Elara sat in her drawing room, surrounded by newspapers, feeling sick. This was her fault. She'd pushed him to fight, hadn't considered the cost. The peerage would exile him for this. His business partners would abandon him. He'd be ruined. The knock on her door this time was louder, insistent. She opened it to find Rowan himself standing there, coat rumpled, hair disheveled, looking like he hadn't slept. Behind him, his carriage waited with Victoria already inside. "Get in," he said. "What?" "Get in the carriage. We're going to Whitechapel." "Your Grace, I don't think—" "The board met again this morning, emergency session. Guess what they decided?" His smile was sharp and slightly wild. "That maybe labor reforms aren't such a bad idea after all. Amazing what happens when you threaten to expose 3 decades of negligence in public. 8-hour shifts start next month. Safety inspections, fair wages, everything I asked for." Elara's legs went weak. "You won." "We won, you, me, Victoria, Thomas, and every other person who's been fighting this fight, while people like me made excuses." He held out his hand. "Now come on. I want to tell them in person, and I want you there when I do." She took his hand. The carriage ride to Whitechapel felt like flying. Victoria was grinning, fierce and triumphant. Rowan kept laughing, this startled, disbelieving sound like he couldn't quite process what he'd done. And Elara sat between them, watching these 2 impossible people who'd somehow found each other through her and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Dangerous, stupid, reckless hope. The reading circle was packed when they arrived. Word had spread somehow. People filled every chair, stood along the walls, crowded in the doorway. They went quiet when Rowan entered, all eyes on the Duke, who'd just become either their champion or their liability. depending on how this played out. Rowan cleared his throat. I have news about the factories. He told them everything, the reforms, the timeline, what it would mean for hours and safety and pay. And then he did something Elara had never seen an aristocrat do. He apologized. I should have done this years ago, should have fought harder, faster. People died while I was being cautious, and that's on me. I can't bring them back, but I can make damn sure it doesn't keep happening. The silence that followed was absolute. Then someone started clapping, slowly at first, then faster. Others joined. Within seconds, the whole room was applauding, stamping feet, shouting approval. Thomas, the boy who'd lost his sister, pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down his face, and hugged the Duke of Ashmont like he was family. Rowan looked stunned, overwhelmed. He caught Elara's eye over Thomas's shoulder, and the gratitude in his expression made her chest ache. Victoria moved to stand beside him, placed a hand on his arm. The gesture was simple, almost casual. But everyone saw it. Everyone understood. This was real. Messy and complicated and completely unprecedented, but real. Later, after the celebration had died down and most people had drifted home, Elara found herself alone with Rowan in the quiet reading circle. Victoria had left to finish some printing work, promising to return tomorrow. The space felt larger in the silence, shadows long across the book-lined walls. Thank you, Rowan said quietly, for pushing me, for not letting me hide. I was terrified I'd destroyed you. You saved me. There's a difference. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight he'd been carrying. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Her heart stuttered. All right. When you brought me Victoria, was it just business, just trying to fulfill the contract? The question hung between them like a blade. Elara could lie, should lie. Protecting herself was what she did, what she'd always done. But standing here, in this place that meant truth and vulnerability and everything she'd been taught to avoid, the words came out anyway. At first, yes. But then I watched you with her, saw you come alive in a way you never did with the others. And I realized... She stopped, swallowed hard. I realized I was jealous. Of her. Of the way you looked at her. And that was completely inappropriate and unprofessional, and I'm sorry. Rowan's expression didn't change. Don't be. Your Grace, Rowan, just Rowan. He reached out, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear with careful fingers. I look at Victoria and I see possibility. Someone I could respect. Build something with, maybe. But when I look at you... He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Elara's breath caught. This was dangerous, wrong. He was her client. She was his employee. There were rules about this, boundaries that existed for good reasons. But his hand was still in her hair and she was leaning into the touch, despite every logical thought screaming at her to stop. This is a terrible idea, she whispered. The best ones usually are. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle or practiced. It was desperate and clumsy and tasted like the tea he'd been drinking, and it was perfect. Elara's hands found his coat, gripped the fabric like she was drowning. His arms circled her waist, pulled her closer. For a moment, nothing else existed. Not the contract. Not the money. Not the impossible gulf between their worlds. Just this. Just them. Then footsteps echoed from the hallway, and they sprang apart like guilty children. Victoria stood in the doorway, one eyebrow raised, expression carefully neutral. Interesting. Elara's face burned. Miss Ashford, this isn't... Relax. I'm not scandalized. Victoria crossed her arms, leaned against the door frame. Though we should probably discuss what exactly is happening here before this gets more complicated. Nothing's happening, Rowan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Please, I run a printing press, not a convent. I know what almost happened. She looked between them, sharp and assessing. Here's what I think. You two have chemistry, obviously, but you, Your Grace, asked me to court you, and you, Miss Whitcomb, are still technically employed to find the Duke a wife, so we need to figure out what we're doing before someone gets hurt. The blunt assessment cut through Elara's spinning thoughts. Victoria was right. This was a mess, a dangerous, unprofessional mess that could destroy all of them if handled wrong. I should go, Elara said, grabbing her coat. "This was a mistake. I apologize for—" "Stop apologizing." Victoria's voice was gentler now. "I'm not angry. I'm practical. If you have feelings for each other, that's fine. But don't lie about it. Don't pretend this is simple when it's not." Rowan ran a hand through his hair, looking more uncertain than Elara had ever seen him. "I don't know what this is. I just know that every time I'm near you, Miss Whitcomb, I forget to be careful, and that terrifies me." "It should," Victoria said, "because people like us don't get to be careless. We don't have that luxury." She pushed off the doorframe. "So here's my proposal. Take a week, both of you. Figure out what you actually want, then we'll talk. Deal?" It wasn't really a question. Elara nodded, not trusting her voice. Rowan did the same. Victoria left, sensible and clear-headed as always, leaving chaos in her wake. Elara walked home through dark streets, mind spinning. A week to figure out what she wanted. It should have been simple. She needed money, needed to save her father's business, needed to fulfill the contract and collect her payment so they could survive. But somewhere between the first rejection and the seventh, between watching Rowan transform from cold duke to desperate reformer, her needs had changed, expanded, become something she didn't know how to name. She wanted him, wanted to see where this dangerous thing between them could go. She also wanted to survive. And she had no idea if she could have both. The letter waiting at home made the choice for her. It was from Lady Helena Thorne, one of London's most powerful noblewomen, known for her cutting wit and her ability to destroy reputations with a single well-placed rumor. Elara opened it with shaking hands. "Miss Whitcomb, I know who you are. E. Thornfield, the radical writer. I have proof. Letters, manuscripts, witnesses. Enough to ruin you completely. I also know about your arrangement with the Duke of Ashmont. Here's my offer. Recommend me as his bride within the week, or I expose everything. Your secret writings, your father's debts, every scandal you've been hiding, your choice. Choose wisely." H.T. The paper fell from Elara's fingers. She'd been found out. After years of careful hiding, someone had connected the pieces, and they were using it as leverage. Recommend Helena Thorne, a woman Rowan would despise who represented everything he'd been fighting against. Or lose everything. Her reputation, her father's future, her voice as E. Thornfield. The walls were closing in, and for the first time in her life, Elara had no idea how to survive. Elara didn't sleep. She sat at her desk until dawn. Helena Thorne's letter spread before her like a death sentence. Watching the words blur and refocus as her candle burned low, every option she considered led to the same conclusion. She was trapped. Recommend Helena, betray Rowan, keep her secret safe. Her father would never know how close they'd come to complete ruin. E. Thornfield could continue writing, continue fighting for the causes that mattered. It would be survival. Ugly, compromised survival, but survival nonetheless. Or refuse. Let Helena expose everything. Watch her father's business collapse under the weight of scandal. Lose her voice as a writer. Become a cautionary tale about women who reached too high and fell hard. She'd spent her whole life calculating these kinds of equations. Risk versus reward. Truth versus survival. But this time, the numbers wouldn't add up. Because there was a third variable she'd never factored in before. What she actually wanted. And what she wanted was sitting in a townhouse across the city, probably awake too, trying to figure out if a duke and a matchmaker could be anything more than a professional disaster. The morning came gray and cold. Elara dressed mechanically, chose her plainest dress, pinned her hair back with shaking fingers. She looked at her reflection and saw a stranger. Someone brittle, breakable. Her father was already awake when she came downstairs, sitting in his chair with a blanket over his legs despite the fire. He looked smaller every day, like he was slowly disappearing. "You didn't sleep," he said. Not a question. Work troubles. The Duke? Among other things. She kissed his forehead, felt how thin his skin had become. "I have meetings today. I'll be back late." "Elara." His hand caught hers, grip surprisingly strong. "Whatever's happening, you know you can tell me." "I know, Papa." But she couldn't. Wouldn't. He'd already lost so much. She wouldn't make him watch her lose everything, too. The address on Helena Thorne's letter led to a mansion in Belgravia that made Rowan's residence look modest. Elara stood outside for 5 full minutes, gathering courage she didn't have, before finally knocking. The butler who answered looked at her like she was something stuck to his shoe. "Tradesman's entrance is around back." "I have an appointment with Lady Thorne." His expression suggested this was unlikely, but he checked anyway, returned looking faintly surprised. "This way?" The house was everything Elara expected. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, art that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. It was beautiful in the way a knife was beautiful, cold and sharp and designed to cut. Helena Thorne waited in a sitting room decorated entirely in white and gold. She was perhaps 40, beautiful in that preserved way wealthy women achieved through expensive creams and carefully managed stress. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Whitcomb, how punctual. Please sit." Elara sat on the edge of a chair that probably cost more than her house. "You know why I'm here." "I do, though I confess I'm curious whether you came to negotiate or surrender." Helena poured tea with practiced elegance. "Sugar?" "I don't want tea. I want to know what you actually want." "Direct." "I like that." Helena set down the pot. "What I want is simple. The Duke of Ashmont has made himself politically toxic with his little labor reform stunt. Half the peerage wants him exiled. The other half wants to study him like a fascinating disease, but he's still wealthy, still powerful, still useful to the right person. And you're the right person. I'm the perfect person. I have the social connections he's just burned, the political allies he'll need to survive what comes next. Together we could rebuild his reputation, make him respectable again." "He doesn't want to be respectable. That's the point." Helena's smile sharpened. "Which is why he needs someone practical to balance his idealism. You've done your job well, Miss Whitcomb. You've awakened his conscience. Now it's time for someone else to manage the consequences." The presumption of it, the casual certainty that she could just step in and claim what Elara had built, made something hot and dangerous rise in Elara's chest. "And if I refuse, then by tomorrow morning, every newspaper in London will know that E. Thornfield, the radical writer calling for women's education and workers' rights, is actually Elara Whitcomb, failed matchmaker from a family drowning in debt. They'll know your father's business is bankrupt. They'll know you've been lying to clients for years." Helena sipped her tea. "Your credibility as a writer will evaporate. No respectable publication will touch your work. And without your income, your father loses everything." Each word landed like a physical blow. Elara's hands clenched in her lap, nails digging into her palms hard enough to hurt. "You destroy an innocent man to get what you want." "I'd destroy anyone to get what I want. That's how power works, Miss Whitcomb. The sooner you learn that, the easier your life will be. And if I recommend you to the Duke, what guarantee do I have that you'll keep your word? You don't. You have my promise, which in our world is worth precisely as much as I decide it's worth." Helena set down her cup. "But I gain nothing from exposing you after you've given me what I want. Your secrets are only valuable as leverage. Once I'm engaged to the Duke, they're worthless." It was true. Coldly, ruthlessly true. Helena Thorne had no reason to destroy Elara once she had Rowan. The threat only worked as long as Elara could still be useful. "I need time to think." "You have until Friday, 3 days. After that, I go to the press." Helena stood, smoothing her skirts. "I'll see you out." Elara walked home through streets that felt different somehow. Sharper, more dangerous, like the city itself was watching her, waiting to see what she'd do. She found Victoria at the print shop, covered in ink as usual, setting type for a new pamphlet. The woman looked up, took one look at Elara's face, and set down her tools. "What happened?" Elara told her everything. Helena's threat, the blackmail, the impossible choice. Victoria listened without interrupting, her expression growing progressively darker. "That vindictive—" She stopped, visibly controlled herself. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. If I refuse, my father loses everything. But if I recommend her to Rowan, you betray everything you've been building, everything he's been fighting for." Victoria crossed her arms. "Have you told him?" "No." "Why not?" "Because what can he do? Fight Helena publicly? She'd bury him. And even if he wanted to help, getting involved would make everything worse. Elara sank onto a stool, suddenly exhausted. This is my problem. My consequences. That's stupid. Excuse me? You heard me. It's stupid. Victoria pulled up another stool, sat facing her directly. You've spent this whole time pushing Rowan to stop hiding, to fight for what matters, to risk everything for truth. Now someone's threatening you, and suddenly you want to handle it alone? That's not strength. That's fear. The words cut deep because they were accurate. Elara had been terrified her whole life, terrified of being exposed, terrified of losing what little security she'd managed to build. And that fear had kept her alive, kept her father's business limping along, kept her secrets buried. But it had also kept her alone. What if I tell him and he can't help? What if I lose everything anyway? Then at least you'll lose it honestly instead of selling out to save yourself. Victoria's voice softened. Look, I don't know you that well, but I know Rowan thinks you're extraordinary, and from what I've seen, he's right. Don't prove him wrong by becoming exactly what Helena Thorne thinks you are, someone who can be bought. The shop door opened before Elara could respond. A young man entered, breathless, holding a newspaper. Miss Ashford, you need to see this. Victoria took the paper, scanned the front page, and went pale. No, they didn't. She handed it to Elara. The headline read, Duke's Secret Radical Romance, Ashmont Court's Common Printer. Below it, a detailed account of Rowan and Victoria's meetings, their conversations about labor reform, the kiss Elara and Rowan had shared at the reading circle, reported as being between Rowan and Victoria, either through confusion or deliberate misrepresentation. Every detail calculated to make Rowan look like a radical sympathizer and Victoria look like a social climbing opportunist. Helena, Elara breathed, she's forcing my hand. This will destroy him. Victoria's hand shook on the newspaper. They'll say he's gone mad, that I seduced him to advance workers' causes. Every reform he fought for will be dismissed as the ravings of a lovesick fool. No, Elara stood, decision crystallizing. She doesn't get to do this. She doesn't get to manipulate us all like chess pieces. What are you going to do? Something incredibly stupid. She left before Victoria could argue, heading straight for Rowan's residence. The butler tried to stop her. Improper visiting hours, the Duke was in meetings, but Elara pushed past him, navigating the house from memory until she found Rowan in his study, surrounded by lawyers and advisors. Everyone out, she said. The men stared at her. Rowan stood slowly. Miss Whitcomb. Everyone out, now. Something in her voice made them move. The lawyers gathered their papers, filed out, exchanging worried glances. The door closed with a soft click. Rowan crossed to her. You saw the paper. I saw it. I also know who planted the story. She pulled out Helena's letter, handed it to him. She's been blackmailing me. Threatened to expose my identity as E. Thornfield unless I recommended her as your bride. When I didn't respond fast enough, she went nuclear. Rowan read the letter, jaw tightening with each line. How long have you known about this? Since last night. And you didn't tell me? I was trying to protect you. I don't need protection. His voice rose, matching hers. I need honesty. I need you to trust that we can face this together instead of carrying it alone like you carry everything else. The anger in his tone shocked her. She'd seen him cold, seen him controlled, but never truly angry. It was almost a relief, proof he was human, capable of messy emotions like everyone else. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't know what to do. Well, we're past that now. He set the letter down, paced to the window. The damage is done. Victoria will be dragged through the mud. I'll be labeled a radical. And Helena Thorne will use this chaos to position herself as the respectable choice who can save me from myself. So what do? We fight back. He turned, and there was something fierce in his expression. Helena wants to play dirty? Fine. We'll show her exactly how dirty things can get. What are you talking about? I'm talking about exposing every skeleton in her perfectly decorated closet. I'm talking about using every connection I have to destroy her credibility before she can destroy ours. I'm talking about war, Elara. The use of her first name sent a jolt through her. He'd never done that before. Always Miss Whitcomb, always proper. This felt different, dangerous. If you go after Helena directly, it will look like retaliation. It will make everything worse. Then what do you suggest? Elara's mind raced. There had to be a way out of this, some angle Helena hadn't considered, some weakness they could exploit. And then it hit her. We give her what she wants, Elara said slowly. You court her, publicly. Make a big show of considering her as a candidate. Are you insane? Listen, Helena's leverage only works if you don't know about it. But now you do. We can use that. Play along. Let her think she's won. And while she's distracted celebrating her victory, we find out who her sources are, how she got her information about me, what other blackmail material she's holding. Then we take it all away from her. Rowan studied her for a long moment. That's risky. Everything we do is risky. At least this way we're in control of how we lose. We're not going to lose. The certainty in his voice almost made her believe it. Almost. The next 3 days were a performance so elaborate it made Elara's previous matchmaking efforts look amateur. Rowan sent flowers to Helena's residence, accepted her invitation to tea, was photographed leaving her home looking appropriately interested. The newspapers ate it up. Duke returns to reason, declared one headline. Ashmont abandons radical romance, crowed another. Victoria went into hiding at Elara's insistence, staying with friends in Southwark where the society reporters wouldn't find her. She hated it, hated running, hated being painted as the villain, but she trusted Elara enough to wait. Elara, meanwhile, played her own role. The dutiful matchmaker, pleased that her client had finally seen sense. She attended one of Helena's teas, smiled and nodded while the woman held court, catalogued every detail she could. What she learned was disturbing. Helena Thorne wasn't just wealthy and connected. She collected information the way some people collected art. Secrets, scandals, leverage. Half the people at her tea table looked vaguely terrified, like they were one wrong word away from social annihilation. Elara recognized that fear, had lived with it her whole life. But watching Helena wield it so casually, using people's vulnerabilities as entertainment, ignited something in her, a fury she'd been suppressing for years. This was the system Rowan had been fighting against, not just economic injustice, but social cruelty, the way power was used to crush instead of build. On the third evening, Elara was leaving Helena's residence when someone grabbed her arm in the darkened street. She spun, heart hammering, and found herself face to face with a young woman in servant's clothing. The girl looked terrified. Miss Whitcomb, I need to talk to you about Lady Thorne. Elara pulled her into a recessed doorway, out of sight. Who are you? Mary, I was her lady's maid. She dismissed me last week, said I was stealing, but I wasn't. The girl's voice cracked. I found something I shouldn't have. What kind of something? Letters, files. She keeps them in a locked drawer in her private study. Information about people, bad things. She uses it to control them. Mary pulled a folded paper from her apron. I took this before she could destroy it. I thought maybe someone should know what she's really like. Elara unfolded the paper with shaking hands. It was a ledger of some kind, names down the left side. Beside each name, a brief note. Gambling debts? Illegitimate child? Affair with married man, secret radical writings. Her own name was there, 3 lines from the bottom. There's more, Mary whispered. Documents, proof. She keeps everything. I don't know where, but it's in that house somewhere. Why are you telling me this? Because I heard her talking. About you. About the Duke. She's planning something worse than what she's already done. The girl's eyes were wide and frightened. I don't know what, but she was laughing when she said it, like it was a game. Elara's blood went cold. When? Tonight, she's hosting a dinner party. All the important people. She said tonight was when everything would come together. Elara pressed coins into Mary's hand, more than she could afford, but the girl had taken a real risk. Thank you. Now go. Get somewhere safe. Don't let anyone know we talked. Mary disappeared into the London fog, and Elara ran. She found Rowan at his residence, preparing for Helena's dinner party. He was in evening dress, looking every inch the Duke, and for a moment Elara forgot why she'd come. Just stared at him, this impossible man who'd somehow become the center of her entire world. Elara? What's wrong? She told him about Mary, about the ledger, about Helena's plan. We need to stop this, she finished. Whatever she's planning, we can't let her do it tonight. How? We don't even know what she's planning. Then we find out. You go to the dinner party, play your role. Keep her distracted, and I'll search her study. Absolutely not. That's breaking and entering. If I'm caught, I'm ruined, which is going to happen anyway if we don't stop her. Elara grabbed his hands. This is the only way. You know it is. I can't ask you to take that risk. You're not asking. I'm choosing. She held his gaze. Trust me, like I'm trusting you. The dinner party was already underway when they arrived. Rowan entered through the front door, all charm and appropriate contrition. Elara slipped around back, found a servant's entrance, picked the lock with tools she'd learned to use years ago for jobs she didn't like remembering. The house was massive, 3 floors of opulent rooms and locked doors and places a person could hide secrets. Elara moved quickly, quietly, staying in the shadows. She could hear the dinner party above, laughter, conversation, the clink of crystal. Helena's private study was on the 2nd floor, down a hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. The door was locked. Of course it was. Elara worked at it with hands that wanted to shake but didn't, listening for footsteps, waiting to be discovered. The lock clicked. Inside, the study was surprisingly plain. A desk, shelves, filing cabinets, nothing ostentatious. This was a working room, not for show. Elara started with the desk, searching drawers systematically, found correspondence, financial records. Nothing incriminating. Then she noticed the cabinet in the corner, locked, heavier than the others. She crossed to it, examined the lock. More complex. Would take time she didn't have. She forced it anyway using a letter opener from the desk in sheer desperation. The lock gave with a crack that sounded like thunder in the quiet room. Inside were files. Dozens of them, each labeled with a name. She found her own quickly. Inside, copies of her essays under the name E. Thornfield, correspondence with her editor, financial records showing her father's debts, even notes from interviews with people she'd thought were friends, turned informants apparently for the right price. But there were others too. Lord Pemberton's gambling addiction, Lady Catherine's secret engagement to a married man, the Minister of Parliament who'd taken bribes, files on dozens of people, each containing enough information to destroy them. This wasn't just leverage. This was systematic blackmail, an entire network of control, and at the bottom of the cabinet, one file thicker than the rest. Duke of Ashmont. Elara pulled it out with trembling hands. Inside was everything. Rowan's reading circle, complete with names of attendees, his labor reform proposals, financial records showing money moved to questionable causes. And photos. Recent photos. Of Rowan and Victoria. Of Rowan and Elara at the reading circle. But there was more. A document labeled Marriage Contract, Draft. Elara read it, horror building with each line. It wasn't a standard marriage contract. It was a trap. Legal language that would give Helena control of Rowan's finances. Clauses about his diminished capacity due to radical sympathies. Provisions for commitment to an asylum if he continued his erratic behavior. Helena wasn't planning to marry Rowan. She was planning to have him declared insane and take control of everything. Footsteps in the hallway. Elara shoved the file under her coat, closed the cabinet as quietly as she could. The footsteps were getting closer. She looked around desperately. No other exit, no place to hide. The window. 3rd floor. No way down that wouldn't break bones. The door handle turned. Elara grabbed the letter opener, useless as a weapon but better than nothing, and pressed herself against the wall behind the door. It swung open. Helena Thorne stepped inside, and she wasn't alone. 2 men followed her, large, well-dressed, not servants. I told you she'd come. Helena's voice was satisfied. Predictable little thing. Check the cabinet. One of the men crossed to the damaged lock, examined it. Forced. Recently. Search her. Elara didn't wait. She lunged, pushing past Helena toward the door. Made it 2 steps before one of the men caught her arm, twisted it behind her back with professional efficiency. The file fell from her coat, papers scattering across the floor. Helena picked up the marriage contract, smoothed it carefully. Stealing from me, Miss Whitcomb? How disappointing. I thought we had an understanding. You're insane. You can't actually think this will work. It already is working. Right now, downstairs, the Duke is making a toast, promising to announce our engagement tomorrow. Everyone's celebrating his return to reason. By next week, he'll be mine. Legally. Completely. She smiled. And you'll be in prison for theft. Funny how things work out. Rowan will never agree to this. He'll fight you. With what? I have files on half of Parliament, evidence of his radical activities, witnesses who'll swear he's unstable. And I have you, the scheming matchmaker who manipulated him for money. Who do you think they'll believe? The man holding Elara's arm tightened his grip. Pain shot through her shoulder. She bit back a cry, refusing to give Helena the satisfaction. Take her to the basement, Helena said. I'll deal with her after the dinner. And someone clean up this mess. They dragged Elara toward the door. She fought, kicked, twisted, screamed, but they were too strong. Down the hallway, down the servants' stairs, into darkness that smelled of damp stone and old wine. They threw her into a small room, locked the door. Elara scrambled to her feet, pounded on the wood. Help! Someone help! But the house was too large, the party too loud. No one could hear her. She was trapped. And upstairs, Rowan was walking into Helena's trap, completely unaware of what was coming. Elara slid down the door, fighting panic. Think. She needed to think. There had to be a way out. Some weakness in the room. Some tools she could use. The space was maybe 10 feet square. Stone walls. Single small window near the ceiling, too high and too narrow to escape through. Old furniture covered in dust sheets. Bottles of wine. Nothing useful. Her hands were shaking, breath coming too fast. This was it. The end of everything. Helena would destroy Rowan, take everything he'd built, and Elara would disappear into prison, or worse, a cautionary tale about women who reached above their station. No. No, she wasn't giving up, not after everything, not when she was this close. Elara stood, methodically searched the room. The furniture, mostly broken. The wine bottles, useless. The dust sheets. Wait. She grabbed one, ripped it into strips with her teeth, braided it quickly. Not rope, not strong enough to hold weight, but maybe... She climbed onto a stack of crates, reaching for the window. The drop outside was steep, but not impossible. If she could get the window open, signal for help somehow. The glass was painted shut. Hadn't been opened in years. She pushed, pulled, finally just smashed it with a wine bottle. The sound of breaking glass was shockingly loud. Elara froze, listening. Footsteps above. Running. They'd heard. She didn't have time to think. Just acted. Tied one end of her makeshift rope to the window frame, prayed it would hold and squeeze through the gap. The broken glass tore her dress, cut her arms. She ignored it. The rope swung wild. Her hands burned where the fabric cut into her palms. The ground looked very far away. She let go. Hit hard. Something in her ankle twisted painfully, but she was out. She was free. Elara ran. Every step sent knives of pain up her leg, but she didn't stop. Through the gardens, over the back wall, into the street where Helena's guests were departing, carriages lined up in ordered elegance. She found Rowan's carriage, his driver dozing in the seat. "Where's the Duke?" she gasped. The driver jerked awake. "Miss? You're bleeding. Where is he?" "Inside. They're making the announcement." Elara didn't wait. She limped back toward the house, ignoring the driver's protests. Her ankle screamed with every step. Blood dripped from the cuts on her arms, staining her ruined dress. She looked like a madwoman. Felt like one, too. The front entrance was blocked by Helena's guards. Elara went around, found a side door servants used, slipped inside. The dining room was directly ahead. Through the open doors she could see them. Rowan standing at the head of the table, glass raised. Helena beside him, radiant in her victory. 24 of London's most powerful people watching, applauding. "And so," Rowan was saying, "I'm pleased to announce—" "Stop!" Elara stumbled into the room. Every head turned. The applause died. Helena's expression went from triumph to fury in an instant. Rowan dropped his glass. "Elara, don't!" She could barely breathe, could barely stand, but she forced the words out. Don't announce anything. It's a trap, all of it. Miss Whitcomb has clearly had some kind of breakdown, Helena said smoothly. Someone call for a doctor. She's trying to have you committed, Elara shouted. I found the documents, the marriage contract. It's not real. It's a legal mechanism to declare you insane and take control of your money. She's been blackmailing half the people in this room. I can prove it. The silence that followed was absolute. Then everyone started talking at once. Helena was denying everything. Guests were demanding explanations. Someone was calling for the police. And Rowan was moving toward Elara, face pale, catching her as her injured ankle finally gave out completely. I've got you, he murmured. I've got you. The files are in her study, second floor. Everything you need. Elara's vision was starting to blur at the edges. Blood loss or shock or both. Don't let her destroy them. I won't. He looked up, found his secretary in the crowd. Samuel, get the police, now, and someone get Dr. Morrison. This is absurd. Helena's composure was cracking. You can't possibly believe this desperate woman over me. Look at her. She's clearly telling the truth. Victoria pushed through the crowd, and she wasn't alone. Behind her were people from the reading circle, workers, common people who had no business at a society dinner but had come anyway. We all heard about the files, the blackmail. My employer published this evening's special edition. She held up a newspaper. Everything Miss Whitcomb just said. It's all here. Names, dates, evidence. The color drained from Helena's face. You, she breathed, staring at Victoria. You did this. We did this. Victoria looked at Elara, at Rowan. All of us. Together. The police arrived within minutes, found the files exactly where Elara said they'd be, started making arrests. Helena first, then some of her associates. The dinner party dissolved into chaos. Elara watched it all from Rowan's arms, consciousness fading in and out. She caught fragments, Victoria arguing with a constable, Rowan giving statements, someone bandaging her arms. The doctor, Dr. Morrison, examining her ankle. Miss Whitcomb, Elara, stay awake. Rowan's voice, close, urgent. She forced her eyes open. Did we win? You won. You incredible, reckless, brilliant woman. You won. His hand cupped her face gently. But you need to stay awake. The doctor says, I'm fine. You're definitely not fine. You have a concussion, a sprained ankle, and you've lost enough blood that Morrison is threatening to admit you to hospital. Can't afford hospital. I'll pay for it. That's not proper. Nothing about this is proper. He pressed his forehead to hers. Don't leave me. Please. I just found you. The raw desperation in his voice cut through the fog in Elara's head. She managed a weak smile. Not going anywhere. Too stubborn. Thank God for that. She let her eyes close then, finally. Safe, for the first time in longer than she could remember, actually safe. When Elara woke, she was in a room she didn't recognize. Clean white walls, morning light through curtains, her ankle wrapped professionally, her arms bandaged, and Rowan asleep in a chair beside the bed, still in his evening clothes, hair disheveled, looking utterly exhausted. She watched him for a moment. This impossible man who'd somehow become her whole world. Then she cleared her throat. You look terrible. His eyes snapped open. Relief flooded his face. You're awake. How do you feel? Like I jumped out a window and ran half a mile on a broken ankle. Sprained. Morrison was very specific about that. He moved to the bed, took her hand carefully. You terrified me. When you came into that dining room bleeding and barely standing, had to stop you, couldn't let her win. She didn't, thanks to you, and Victoria, and about 50 workers from the reading circle who showed up demanding justice. He smiled, but it was shaky. Helena's been arrested. The files are evidence. Her blackmail network is finished. And you? Free. Finally. Completely free. He raised her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. All thanks to you. I ruined your dinner party. Best thing that ever happened to it. Elara laughed, which hurt, but she didn't care. What happens now? Now you rest, recover. Let Morrison fuss over you for a few more days. And then? Rowan's expression grew serious. Then we figure out what this is. You and me. What we actually want it to be. I thought you were courting Victoria. Victoria and I had a very enlightening conversation last night. She pointed out, quite reasonably, that while we respect each other enormously, we're not actually in love, and that perhaps I should stop being an idiot and admit who I am in love with. Elara's heart stopped. Who? You. Obviously you. It's always been you. He looked almost nervous. Though, if you don't feel the same, I do. You do? I'm terrified, and this is completely impractical and probably doomed, but yes, I do. His smile was the most genuine thing she'd ever seen. Then we'll figure it out. Together. No more secrets, no more performing, just truth. Just truth, Elara echoed. He leaned down, kissed her carefully, mindful of her injuries. It was gentle and perfect, and tasted like a promise. When he pulled back, his expression had shifted, determined. There's one more thing. What? Your father's business. I looked into the debts while you were unconscious. Most of the creditors are companies I either own or have influence over. I've paid them off. Elara's breath caught. You what? I paid off your father's debts, all of them. It's done. Rowan, you can't just, that's too much. I can't accept. It's not charity. It's justice. His voice was firm. Those debts were predatory. The interest rates illegal. They were designed to trap people like your father in permanent servitude. I should have noticed years ago and fixed it. Consider this me correcting my own failure. Tears burned in Elara's eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll marry me. The words hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and wonderful. You're proposing while I'm in a hospital bed? I'm proposing while you're alive, which 12 hours ago wasn't guaranteed. So yes, right now. Marry me, Elara. Not because I need a duchess, not because of contracts or social expectations, but because I love you and I can't imagine my life without you in it. She should say no. Should point out all the reasons this was impossible. The scandal, the social gap, the fact that she was a matchmaker who'd fallen for her own client, which was the plot of a bad novel. But looking at him, this difficult, principled, impossible man who'd changed his entire world because she'd asked him to, all the rational arguments dissolved. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. His kiss this time was less careful, more desperate, full of relief and joy and a future neither of them had expected. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. We're going to cause such a scandal. Good, Elara said. The world could use more honest scandals and fewer polite lies. My revolutionary. Your impossible problem. My perfect solution. Outside the hospital room, London was waking up to news of Helena Thorne's arrest and the Duke's unexpected engagement. The newspapers would have a field day. Society would be shocked. The peerage would clutch their pearls and prophesy doom. But inside this room, two people who'd learned to survive by hiding finally allowed themselves to be seen. Completely. Honestly. Without armor. And for the first time in both their lives, the truth didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like freedom. It felt like freedom for about 6 hours. Then the newspapers arrived. Elara was still in the hospital bed, ankle propped up, when Victoria burst through the door, carrying what looked like half of London's morning editions. Her expression was somewhere between furious and impressed. You need to see this. She spread the papers across the bed. Every single one led with some variation of the same story. Duke's matchmaker becomes Duchess. From employee to engagement, the Ashmont scandal. Common woman catches Duke. Romance or opportunism? The articles ranged from breathless romance to thinly veiled accusation. Some painted Elara as a scheming social climber who'd manipulated her way into nobility. Others cast Rowan as a lovesick fool who'd abandoned reason for passion. A few even suggested the entire Helena Thorne affair had been staged to give Elara an excuse to play hero. They're making us into a circus, Elara said quietly. They're making you into a threat. Victoria tapped one particularly vicious editorial. This one's from Lord Pemberton, you know, the gambling addict from Helena's files. He's calling for an investigation into your suspicious rise. Says no proper matchmaker would cross professional boundaries unless motivated by greed. He's terrified I have copies of those files. Do you? No, but maybe I should let him think I do. Elara pushed herself upright, ignoring the protest from her ankle. Where's Rowan? At his residence. Fielding angry letters from half the peerage, they're not taking the engagement well. I need to see him. You need to stay in bed. Dr. Morrison's orders. Morrison can send me a bill. Elara was already reaching for her clothes, cleaned and mended by someone while she slept. Help me get dressed. Victoria sighed but complied. You're as stubborn as he is. This is going to be a disaster of a marriage. Probably. But at least it'll be honest. 20 minutes later, Elara was in a carriage heading toward Mayfair, ankle wrapped and throbbing, Victoria beside her reading aloud from the more creative newspaper accounts. Listen to this one. The Duke of Ashmont, once a pillar of society, has fallen prey to the oldest trick in the feminine arsenal, feigned vulnerability combined with strategic heroics. Victoria snorted. Feigned vulnerability. You literally jumped out a window. Only after I got trapped in a basement. Details. Victoria folded the paper. How are you really feeling about all of this? Elara watched the city pass outside the window. Gray buildings under grayer sky, people hurrying about their business, oblivious to the scandal brewing in society's upper reaches. A week ago, she'd been one of them, invisible, struggling, safe in her anonymity. Now she was about to become one of the most scrutinized women in England. Terrified, she admitted, but also alive, like I've been holding my breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. That's either very brave or very stupid. Can it be both? They found Rowan in his study, surrounded by correspondence. He looked up when they entered, relief washing over his features. You're supposed to be resting. I'm supposed to be planning a wedding with my future husband. Resting can wait. Elara crossed to his desk, looked at the letters. How bad is it? Lord Pemberton wants my head. Lady Catherine's mother is threatening legal action for breach of promise, which is absurd since I never promised Catherine anything. The board is demanding another emergency meeting, and my cousin Edward has sent word that if I go through with this unsuitable match, half the family will boycott the wedding. He set down the latest letter, rubbed his eyes. So, about average for a scandal. We could postpone, give people time to adjust. No. Rowan's voice was firm. We've already hidden enough, waited enough. I'm not postponing our life together because some aristocrats have delicate sensibilities. They could make things very difficult for us. Let them try. Victoria cleared her throat. Actually, I have an idea, but you're both going to hate it. They turned to her. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, expression calculating. You need to change the narrative, she said. Right now the story is Duke makes questionable romantic choice. You need to make it Duke and matchmaker expose corruption, fall in love in process. One makes Elara look like an opportunist. The other makes you both look like heroes. How do we do that? Elara asked. You go public, with everything. Helena's blackmail network, the files, every name, every secret. Show people that this wasn't about romance, it was about justice. And the engagement is just the natural consequence of two people fighting the same battle. Rowan shook his head. That would destroy dozens of people. Some of whom were Helena's victims, not her accomplices. Then you pick carefully. Expose the ones who use their power to hurt others. Protect the ones who are just trying to survive. Victoria's voice softened. I know it's not clean. Nothing about this is clean. But right now, people think Elara seduced you for money. If you don't fight that narrative, it becomes truth. Elara looked at Rowan. He was already considering it. She could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the moral weight of exposing people's secrets balanced against the cost of silence. There's another option, she said slowly. We don't expose anyone. We just tell our story, the truth of it, how we met, what we were each fighting for, what we found in each other. She picked up one of the newspapers. These articles paint me as either a schemer or a naive girl who got lucky. What if we showed them who I actually am? How? E. Thornfield writes an essay, about matchmaking as survival, about women navigating impossible systems, about finding love while fighting for justice. It goes in every major paper tomorrow morning. Victoria's eyes lit up. I can print it, distribute it myself if the papers won't take it. They'll take it, Rowan said. I'll make sure of it. I own enough shares in enough publications. He looked at Elara. Are you sure? Once you connect your real name to E. Thornfield publicly, you can't take it back. I don't want to take it back. I'm tired of hiding. The essay took 6 hours to write. Elara sat at Rowan's desk, ankle elevated, and poured out everything she'd been holding in for years. The economics of matchmaking, the performance required of women in her position. How she'd built a business on understanding what people needed versus what they claimed to want. The desperation of watching her father's business fail, meeting Rowan, realizing he wasn't looking for perfection, but for truth. Finding Victoria, fighting Helena, falling in love in the middle of all of it, not despite the chaos, but because of it. She didn't soften anything, didn't make herself sympathetic or Rowan noble, just told the truth as she'd lived it, messy, contradictory, human. When she finished, her hand was cramping and her eyes burned. She handed the pages to Rowan. He read in silence, expression unreadable. When he looked up, his eyes were suspiciously bright. This is extraordinary. It's honest. Same thing. He kissed her forehead gently. Send it. Let them see who they're actually dealing with. The essay ran in 4 major newspapers the next morning. By noon, it had been reprinted in 6 more. By evening, it was being read aloud in coffee houses and debated in drawing rooms across London. The response was mixed. Half the aristocracy called it scandalous, a commoner daring to critique her betters, a woman presuming to have intellectual opinions. They demanded Rowan reconsider his engagement, suggested Elara had clearly manipulated him with radical ideas. But the other half, and more importantly, everyone outside the aristocracy, loved it. Working women saw themselves in Elara's description of strategic survival. Men who'd built businesses from nothing recognized the desperation of watching everything collapse. People who'd felt trapped by social expectations understood the courage required to choose truth over safety. Within 3 days, E. Thornfield became the most discussed writer in London, and Elara Whitcomb became something she'd never expected, a symbol. The first test came exactly 1 week after the essay published. Elara was at Rowan's residence. She'd effectively moved in, propriety be damned, when his butler announced visitors. Lady Margaret Ashford and her daughter Catherine, the same Catherine who'd been one of Elara's failed candidates. Should I tell them you're not receiving? The butler asked. Rowan looked at Elara. She took a breath, straightened her spine. No, show them in. The 2 women entered with the kind of careful elegance that came from years of practice. Lady Margaret's expression was neutral, impossible to read. Catherine looked nervous. Your Grace, Miss Whitcomb. Lady Margaret's curtsy was precise. Thank you for seeing us. Of course, please sit. Rowan gestured to the chairs. Tea? No, thank you. This won't take long. Lady Margaret folded her hands in her lap. I wanted to apologize. The silence that followed was profound. I beg your pardon? Elara finally said. I said terrible things about you when news of the engagement broke. Called you calculating, presumptuous, a social climber using feminine wiles. Lady Margaret's voice was steady, but her hands were clenched tight. I was wrong. I read your essay. More importantly, I read it with my daughter. And we had a very enlightening discussion about the games we've all been playing. Catherine spoke up, voice quiet. You rejected me because I was performing, because I was being who I thought you wanted instead of who I actually am. She looked at Rowan. And you were right. I hated every second of that meeting, hated pretending to care about things that bored me just to seem suitable. I'm sorry, Rowan said gently. I should have been kinder in my rejection. No. You were honest. That was kinder than leading me on would have been. Catherine turned to Elara. What you wrote about women's survival strategies, about having to perform competence while hiding capability, about shrinking yourself to fit spaces that were never designed for you, that's my entire life. My mother's life. Every woman I know. Lady Margaret nodded slowly. We came to say thank you.
for writing what we've all been thinking but we're too afraid to say, and to apologize for judging you when you had the courage we lacked. Elara's throat tightened. You don't need to apologize. Yes, I do.
We all do. Lady Margaret stood. You're going to face significant opposition, Miss Whitcomb, from people far more powerful and far less reasonable than me. But I want you to know, there are women watching who are grateful someone finally said the quiet part loud. You're not as alone as they'll try to make you feel. After they left, Elara sat in stunned silence. That was unexpected, she finally said. That was the tide turning. Rowan pulled her close. They tried to paint you as the problem, but you just made yourself the solution instead. The next 2 weeks were a blur of similar encounters. Some hostile, Lord Pemberton tried to have Elara banned from social events, citing her corrupting influence. Some tentatively supportive, young women started appearing at the reading circle, asking if they could attend, if they could learn, if there was room for them in this new world being built. Victoria expanded her printing operation to handle the demand for Thornfield's collected essays. Elara's father, freed from debt and restored to health by relief, reopened his textile business with Rowan's backing and immediately implemented the same labor reforms Rowan had fought for in his own factories. The reading circle evolved. What had been Rowan's secret project became a public institution. They rented a larger space, hired teachers, opened enrollment to anyone regardless of class or gender. The waiting list grew to 300 names within a month. And through it all, Elara and Rowan planned a wedding that everyone said was impossible. The ceremony was set for early spring. No cathedral, no elaborate society affair. Instead, they chose the reading circle's new building, a former warehouse Victoria's connections had helped them acquire. The guest list was a scandal unto itself. Workers and aristocrats side by side, women in worn dresses next to men in formal evening wear, the people from the margins sharing space with the people who'd spent careers pretending those margins didn't exist. Elara's father walked her down an aisle lined with books. She wore a simple dress, beautiful but practical, made by her father's revived textile company. No veil, no pretense, just her, carrying flowers Victoria had picked that morning. Rowan waited at the front, looking nervous and perfect. Beside him stood Victoria as his chosen witness, and Thomas, the boy who'd lost his sister, as his second. The officiant was a minister who'd been blacklisted by most churches for supporting workers' rights. He didn't read the traditional vows. Instead, he said, "Marriage in the eyes of society is about property and lineage and maintaining order. But marriage in truth is about choosing to build something together, to face the world as partners instead of as isolated individuals fighting alone." Rowan, Elara, you've already done the hard part. You've seen each other clearly. Now comes the beautiful part, choosing each other anyway. Rowan took Elara's hands. I promise to never ask you to be smaller than you are, to fight beside you, not for you, to choose truth even when lies would be easier. Elara's voice shook but held steady. I promise to never let you hide, to challenge you when you're wrong, to remind you who you chose to be on the days you forget. Then by the power vested in me, and more importantly, by the commitment you've made to each other, I declare you married. Build something worth the fight. The kiss was witnessed by 300 people who shouldn't have been in the same room together, but were anyway, because 2 people had decided that impossible was just another word for difficult. The celebration afterward was chaotic. Workers danced with duchesses. Thomas gave a toast that made half the aristocrats uncomfortable and the other half thoughtful. Someone started a debate about labor law that turned into a shouting match, until Victoria stood on a table and told everyone to shut up and eat cake. Elara's father pulled her aside during the chaos, eyes wet. Your mother would have loved this, he said. The noise, the mess, the absolute defiance of everything proper. I wish she could have been here. She is, every time you refuse to make yourself smaller, every time you choose truth over safety. He kissed her forehead. I'm so proud of you. Elara held on to him, this man who'd lost so much but never tried to make her into something she wasn't. I love you, Papa. I know, now go dance with your impossible husband before he gets into another argument about factory conditions. She found Rowan exactly where predicted, in heated discussion with a factory owner about shift rotations. She took his hand,
pulled him away mid-sentence.
Dance with me. I was making an important point about worker fatigue. You can make it later. Right now, you're going to dance with your wife. The word still felt strange, foreign, perfect. They danced badly. Neither of them had much practice with the formal stuff, but they danced anyway. Around them, the party continued. The reading circle's first graduates threw flowers. Victoria argued politics with a viscount. Thomas taught a duchess's daughter how to do a working-class jig. We actually did it, Rowan said, wonder in his voice. We changed things. We started changing things. There's a difference. Elara looked around at the impossible mix of people. We're going to face pushback, resistance, people who want things to go back to the way they were. Let them try. You say that now. Wait until the board tries to oust you again. They already tried. I won. Again. He spun her clumsily, making her laugh. Besides, I have you now. We win together or we lose together. Either way, I'm not facing it alone. The party continued late into the night. Eventually, people drifted home, some in carriages, some on foot, all carrying the strange energy of having witnessed something that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. Elara and Rowan stood in the emptying hall, surrounded by the debris of celebration. Flowers wilting on tables, half-empty glasses. A world they'd built from nothing but stubborn hope. What happens now? Elara asked. Now we keep going, build the institution, support the workers, write more essays, fight more boards, make more impossible things possible. He turned to face her fully. Together. Together, she echoed. It wasn't an ending, wasn't even close. They still had enemies, still faced opposition from people who hated what they represented. The system they were fighting hadn't collapsed, it had barely noticed them yet. But standing there in their borrowed warehouse turned wedding hall, surrounded by proof that change was possible, Elara felt something she'd never quite believed in before. Not hope. Hope was too fragile. This was certainty. Bone-deep knowledge that they'd started something that couldn't be stopped, not by scandal or social pressure or the weight of tradition, because they hadn't just fallen in love. They'd built something bigger than romance, a community, a movement, a proof of concept that truth could survive in a world built on lies. The next morning, still exhausted from the wedding, Elara woke to find Rowan already up, reading at the window. Morning light painted him in shades of gold. What are you reading? He held up a newspaper. Your next essay just published. The Economics of Revolution, How Working-Class Education Threatens Inherited Power. That was supposed to run next week. Victoria moved up the schedule. Said after the wedding, timing was perfect. He set down the paper, crossed to the bed. You're going to start a war. I thought we already started a war. That was a skirmish. This is going to be a war. He kissed her gently. Good thing I'm on your side. Good thing you don't have a choice. You married me. Best decision I ever made. A knock interrupted them. Rowan's secretary, Samuel, looking apologetic. Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but there's a situation. The board has called another emergency meeting. They're threatening to vote you out as chairman unless you publicly distance yourself from from the Duchess's writings. Rowan didn't even hesitate. Tell them I decline. If they want me out, they can vote, but I won't apologize for supporting my wife. Your Grace, if you lose the chairmanship, then I lose it. I'll still own my shares. I'll still have influence. They can't actually remove me from my own company, just from leadership. Let them try. He looked at Elara. What do you think? I think they're testing you, seeing if marriage made you soft. What should I do? Call their bluff. Show up to the meeting with me. Make them say to my face that I'm the problem. Samuel looked horrified. You can't bring a woman to a board meeting. I can do whatever I want. I'm the Duke. Rowan's smile was sharp. Set it up. Tomorrow. And Samuel, make sure the press knows. All of them. The board meeting became a spectacle. Elara walked into that room full of powerful men who'd spent careers controlling fortunes and crushing opposition, and she did it with her head high. Wore her plainest dress, carried no jewelry except her wedding ring, refused to play their game of presentation and polish. The chairman, Lord Whitmore, old money and older prejudices, stood when they entered. Your Grace, this is highly irregular. So is calling an emergency meeting the day after my wedding. Irregular seems to be the theme. Rowan took his seat at the table. Elara sat beside him. Shall we begin? The meeting was brutal. 3 hours of barely veiled insults, accusations that Rowan had lost his mind, demands that he choose between his company and his radical associations, threats about stock prices and investor confidence. Elara sat through it all in silence, watching, learning. These men thought power came from volume and aggression. They were wrong. Power came from knowing what people feared and using it. When they finally turned to her directly, demanding she explain herself, she was ready. Gentlemen, you seem to think I'm the problem, that my writings threaten your business model. You're absolutely right. She stood, met each gaze steadily. I do threaten your model, because your model requires desperate workers who have no choice but to accept terrible conditions. And every essay I write, every person we educate, removes one more worker from your pool of desperation. This is exactly what we're talking about. Lord Whitmore slammed his hand on the table. Radical propaganda. It's economics, basic supply and demand. If workers have options, they demand better treatment. If they demand better treatment, you have to provide it or lose them. You're not angry about my politics. You're angry that I'm making your exploitation harder. The silence that followed was cold and dangerous. Your Grace, Lord Whitmore said quietly, if you allow this woman to continue speaking, she's my wife. She speaks when she wants. Then you leave us no choice. We vote to remove you as chairman, effective immediately. Rowan stood slowly. Then I vote to sell all my shares to a workers' cooperative I've been organizing for the past month. They'll elect their own leadership, set their own policies, and you'll have to negotiate with people who actually understand what fair labor looks like. The room erupted, men shouting, papers flying, accusations of betrayal and insanity. Through it all, Rowan stood calm, Elara beside him. You're destroying everything your father built, someone yelled. Good. My father built an empire on suffering. I'm building something better. They left the meeting to chaos and threats and promises of legal action that would tie things up for years. But as they stepped outside into cold morning air, Rowan was smiling. That felt incredible. You just gave up control of your largest company. I gave up the illusion of control. The workers were always the ones with real power. I just helped them realize it. He took her hand. What do we do now? Now we go home, rest. And tomorrow we start the next fight. There's always another fight. That's what makes it worth doing. They walked through London streets hand in hand, past people hurrying to work, past buildings that held both dreams and desperation. The city was waking up, changing, evolving, despite the people trying to keep it frozen in amber. Somewhere behind them, a board of directors was discovering that their power had limits. Somewhere ahead, workers were learning they had voices. And somewhere in between, Elara and Rowan were building proof that love could be both radical and practical, both vulnerable and fierce. The scandal would continue. The opposition would escalate. There would be setbacks and victories and long nights questioning whether any of it mattered. But walking through London with her impossible husband, Elara felt something settle in her chest. Not peace, she'd probably never have peace, but purpose, direction. The bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Fighting, building, refusing to accept that impossible meant defeated. I love you, she said suddenly. Rowan stopped walking, turned to her with surprise and warmth. I love you too. What brought that on? Just wanted to say it. While it's true. It's always going to be true. But don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not. He kissed her there on the street, not caring who saw. You're stuck with me, Elara Whitcomb Halstead. For better or worse. Probably worse, given our track record. Worse is more interesting anyway. They continued home through the waking city, two people who'd chosen each other and chosen truth, and were discovering that the combination might just be enough to change the world. Or at least start the conversation about changing it, which, in the end, was all anyone could really do. Start the conversation. Refuse to stop talking. Keep building until impossible became inevitable. Start the conversation. Refuse to stop talking. Keep building until impossible became inevitable. The words echoed in Elara's head 3 months later as she stood outside Parliament, watching workers file through doors that had never been meant for them. It was Rowan's idea, testifying before a special committee on labor reform. But it was the workers themselves who demanded to speak. 50 of them, from factories and mills and mines across England, all prepared to tell their stories to men who'd spent careers pretending those stories didn't exist. Thomas stood beside her, wearing a suit borrowed from Rowan's wardrobe, looking terrified and determined in equal measure. "What if they don't listen?" he asked. "Then we make them listen." Elara straightened his collar. "You've got this. Just tell them about your sister, about what actually happens in those factories. The truth is the most powerful weapon you have." The truth got her killed. The truth silenced got her killed. The truth spoken might save the next girl. He nodded, swallowed hard, and walked inside. Elara wanted to follow, but she wasn't allowed. Women weren't permitted in the gallery during testimony. Another rule. Another wall. She'd spent the morning arguing with clerks about it, getting nowhere. Victoria found her pacing outside, furious and helpless. "Still banned?" "Still banned. Apparently my presence would be distracting to serious legislative business." Elara kicked at a loose stone. "They're testifying about their lives and I can't even watch." "So we make them regret that decision." Victoria pulled a notebook from her bag. "I've got reporters from 6 papers waiting for interviews the moment testimony ends. Whatever happens in there, we control the narrative that comes out." "That's not the same as being allowed in." "No, but it's what we've got." Victoria's voice softened. "You can't fight every battle at once. Today we focus on labor reform. Tomorrow we fight for women's access. The day after that, something else. That's how revolutions work, one impossible thing at a time." She was right. Elara knew she was right. But standing outside while others fought battles she'd helped start felt wrong, like being a general who sent soldiers to war but stayed safe at home. "I hate waiting." "I know, but you're good at it. You've been waiting your whole life for a world that treats people fairly. What's a few more hours?" Those hours crawled. Elara paced, read newspapers, rewrote the same paragraph of her next essay 17 times. Finally, as afternoon light slanted gold across Parliament's stone facade, the doors opened and workers began emerging. Thomas came out looking shaken. Beside him, Rowan, who'd been allowed inside as a peer, had his hand on the young man's shoulder. "How did it go?" Elara asked. "They listened." Thomas sounded stunned. "They actually listened, asked questions, took notes. One of them, Lord Cheswick, his son works in my factory. He didn't know about the conditions, or he didn't want to know. But after I told him about my sister, about how she died because she couldn't stay awake," Thomas's voice cracked. "He said he'd investigate personally." "That's a start?" "It's more than a start. It's a crack in the wall." Rowan looked exhausted but satisfied. 3 committee members committed to supporting the 8-hour workday. 2 more are considering it. They're scheduling follow-up hearings. This isn't over. Victoria was already scribbling notes. "I need quotes, details, everything you can remember." As she interviewed Thomas, Rowan pulled Elara aside. "There's something else. Lord Whitmore approached me after the testimony." "Your former board chairman? The one who called me a radical threat?" "The very same. He wants to meet, privately. Says he has a proposal." Elara's instincts screamed trap. "What kind of proposal?" "He wouldn't say. Just asked if we'd hear him out." Rowan's expression was cautious. "Could be genuine. Could be another attempt to undermine us. But I think we should find out which." They met Lord Whitmore that evening in a neutral location, a hotel dining room, public enough to prevent anything too underhanded. The old man arrived exactly on time, looking diminished somehow. Older. Less certain. "Your Grace, Duchess." He nodded to each of them. "Thank you for coming." "You said you had a proposal," Rowan said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I do, but first I owe you an apology." Whitmore's hands were clasped tight on the table. "I called you reckless. Said you were destroying everything your father built. I was wrong." The admission hung in the air, unexpected and heavy. "What changed your mind?" Elara asked carefully. "My grandson. He's 15, works in one of my factories.
I thought it would teach him the value of hard work.
Last week he came home and asked me why the other boys his age looked so tired all the time. Why some of them fell asleep standing up. Why a girl he knew had scars on her hands from machinery. Whitmore's voice was rough. He asked me if I knew, if I cared. And I realized I didn't. I'd stopped seeing them as people and started seeing them as production numbers. Many people never realize that, Elara said quietly. You're ahead of most. I'm late, unforgivably late, but I'm here now. He pulled out papers from his coat. I've drafted a new company charter, worker representation on the board, mandatory safety standards, profit sharing. It's not perfect, but it's a start. I want your input, your approval, and I want to implement it across all my holdings. Rowan took the papers, scanned them. His eyebrows rose. This is comprehensive. It's expensive. It'll cut my profit margins by nearly 40%, but my grandson shouldn't have to be ashamed of his family name. Whitmore looked at Elara directly. You were right. My model required desperation. That makes me complicit in suffering. I can't undo the past, but I can change what comes next. They spent 2 hours going through the charter, Elara and Rowan suggesting modifications, Whitmore taking notes. By the end, they had something that approached actual worker protection. When do you implement this? Rowan asked. Monday. I've already informed the board. They're furious. Several are threatening to sell their shares. Whitmore smiled tiredly. Let them. The workers' cooperative you organized is offering fair price. I'd rather sell to people who'll actually use their power responsibly. After he left, Elara sat in silence, processing. That just happened, she finally said. One of our biggest opponents just became an ally. People can change. Who knew? You did. You've always believed people could choose better. Rowan took her hand. That's why you write. Why you fight. Because you believe in the possibility of change. I believe in the necessity of change. The possibility is still terrifying. Good thing we're used to being terrified. The following weeks brought more cracks in the wall. 2 more factory owners adopted similar charters. A newspaper that had previously called Elara a dangerous radical published a front-page editorial praising her vision. The workers' cooperative purchased 3 more companies, implementing reforms across all of them. And the reading circle exploded. What had started as Rowan's secret project in Whitechapel now had branches in 5 cities. They'd taught over 800 people to read, held classes in mathematics, history, political theory, created a library that loaned books to anyone who asked, no questions, no judgments. The waiting list was now over 2,000 names. Elara stood in the main hall one evening, watching students bent over books, and felt the weight of it. Not burden, responsibility. These people were trusting them, trusting that education would actually improve their lives, that knowledge was worth the risk of hoping for better. A young woman approached her, maybe 19, work-roughened hands clutching a book. Excuse me, Your Grace. I wanted to thank you. For what? For this. All of it. She held up the book, a copy of Mary Wollstonecraft. I'm a seamstress. Work 16 hours most days. Never thought I'd have time to read, let alone read philosophy. But then I saw your essay, the one about women's education, and I thought, maybe it's possible. Maybe I can be more than just a seamstress. You already are more than a seamstress. You're a person with thoughts and dreams and value that has nothing to do with what you produce. The woman's eyes filled. That's what the book says. I just never believed anyone actually thought it about people like me. I do. We all do. That's why we're here. After she left, Elara found Victoria organizing books in the corner. We need more space, Victoria said without preamble. And more teachers. And more books. We're turning away 50 people a week because we're at capacity. Where do we get the money for expansion? Well, you married a duke. That helps. Victoria's smile was wry. But actually, I've been talking to some of the women who've come through the program. They want to help fund it. Small contributions, but enough to matter. They want ownership, want to prove it's not just charity from above. That's perfect. It's slow, but it's sustainable. Victoria set down the books she'd been holding. Elara, we did it. We actually built something that works. We started building something. There's a difference. Always a pessimist. Always a realist. But Elara smiled. Though I'll admit, Reality is looking better than it used to. The real test came 6 months after the wedding, when Parliament voted on comprehensive labor reform. The bill wasn't everything Rowan and Elara had fought for. It had been compromised and weakened and negotiated until parts of it were barely recognizable, but it included an 8-hour workday, mandatory safety inspections, penalties for employers who violated standards. It was something, real, tangible, something. Elara sat in the gallery. Women were finally allowed to observe votes after Victoria had organized a protest that blocked Parliament's entrance for 3 days, and watched men debate whether workers deserved basic dignity. The arguments were predictable. Economic concerns, fears about competitiveness, claims that workers were too simple to appreciate shorter hours, that they'd just spend the extra time drinking, every tired justification for maintaining suffering that had been used for generations. But there were new voices too. Men who'd toured factories after their workers testified, who'd seen the conditions with their own eyes, who'd been forced to confront the reality that their comfort was built on other people's exhaustion. Lord Cheswick, the man whose son worked with Thomas, stood to speak. "I've spent 20 years in this chamber voting against reforms like this, called them unnecessary, economically dangerous. I was wrong." His voice carried through the silent room. "I was wrong because I was ignorant, deliberately ignorant. I chose not to see what my investments were built on because seeing would require changing. But my son saw. And he asked me questions I couldn't answer. So I went to the factories. I looked. And what I saw was unconscionable." He detailed what he'd found: the exhaustion, the injuries, the children working hours that would break adults, the women too tired to care for their own families because they were spending all their strength making profits for people who'd never know their names. "We can do better," he finished. "We must do better. If we claim to be civilized, we cannot continue profiting from barbarism. I vote yes." The chamber erupted in debate, but when the vote was finally called, labor reform passed. Barely. By a margin of just 8 votes. But it passed. Elara sat frozen, not quite believing. Beside her, other women were crying, celebrating. Someone grabbed her hand, a worker she recognized from the reading circle. "We won," the woman whispered. "We actually won." "We won this round," Elara said carefully. "There will be others." "Let them come. We know how to fight now." Outside Parliament, workers had gathered, hundreds of them, waiting for news. When word spread that the bill had passed, the celebration was immediate and overwhelming. People cheering, crying, embracing strangers. Rowan found Elara in the crowd, lifted her off her feet, spun her around. "We did it. You did it. You testified. You convinced them. We did it together. You, me, Victoria, Thomas, everyone who refused to accept that this was how things had to be." He set her down, keeping his hands on her waist. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? Proof that change is possible? This is proof that fighting works. Sometimes. When enough people fight together." She looked around at the celebrating crowd. "Now comes the hard part." "What hard part?" "We won. We won the vote. Now we have to make sure the law actually gets enforced, that factory owners don't find loopholes, that workers know their rights and can demand them. That this doesn't just become paper that looks good but changes nothing." Rowan's expression shifted. "You're right, this isn't the end. It's barely the beginning, but it's a beginning. That's something. That's everything." The implementation fight took another year. Factory inspections revealed violations. Workers filed complaints. Some employers complied immediately. Others fought, testing the limits of the new law, looking for weaknesses. Elara and Victoria documented everything, published reports, named names, made it impossible for violations to hide in darkness. The reading circle became a legal clinic too. They brought in lawyers, progressive ones who believed workers deserved representation, to help people navigate the new system, taught workers how to organize, how to demand their rights, how to build power collectively. And slowly, grudgingly, things changed. Not everywhere, not all at once, but in measurable, undeniable ways. Children started attending school instead of factories. Workers came home with energy left for their families. Injuries decreased, deaths decreased. The statistics Elara had once used to argue for reform now showed that reform was working. Lord Pemberton, who'd fought them from the start, tried one last attack, published an essay claiming the reforms were destroying the economy, that businesses were fleeing to countries with cheaper labor, that Elara and Rowan had ruined England's competitive advantage. Elara wrote a response that tore his arguments apart with actual data, showed that productivity had increased under the new system because workers who weren't exhausted made fewer mistakes, proved that businesses built on exploitation were fragile businesses that deserved to fail. Ended with a challenge. Lord Pemberton claims to defend the economy. I defend the people who make that economy possible. History will judge which priority mattered more. The essay was republished in 14 newspapers, read aloud in Parliament, became required reading in the Reading Circle's political education classes. Pemberton didn't respond. Instead, 3 months later, he quietly sold his factory holdings and retired from public life. "Another one down," Victoria said, reading the news. "Another 100 waiting to take his place," Elara replied. But she smiled. "Though they'll have to fight harder than he did." 2 years after the wedding, the Reading Circle opened its 10th location. The ceremony was simple. No dignitaries, no speeches, just workers cutting a ribbon and walking into a space that was theirs. Elara stood with Rowan watching it happen. "Your father would have hated this," she said. "Completely. He'd have called it the destruction of the natural order, the collapse of civilization." Rowan's arm circled her waist, "Which is how I know we're doing something right." "Do you ever regret it? Burning your relationships with the peerage, giving up control of your companies, becoming the scandal instead of the respectable duke?" "Every morning I wake up and spend approximately 30 seconds regretting it. Then I remember the alternative was a life of comfortable lies and strategic cruelty. The regret passes quickly." "Only 30 seconds? You're getting better." "Practice." He kissed her temple. "What about you? Regrets?" Elara considered the question honestly. 2 years ago, she'd been desperate, drowning in debt, fighting for survival. Her biggest dream had been saving her father's business, and maybe, possibly, writing something that mattered. Now she was a duchess who'd rejected every expectation of that title, a writer whose essays were studied in universities and reading circles alike, a woman whose name had become synonymous with radical change. She'd made enemies, burned bridges, sacrificed the safety of anonymity for the risk of visibility. "No," she said finally. "No regrets, just exhaustion and determination in roughly equal measure." "That sounds about right." They walked home through London streets that felt different now. Not transformed, the city was still full of injustice and struggle, but changed. Opening, possibilities emerging where none had existed before. Elara's father was waiting when they arrived, sitting by the fire in the drawing room they'd renovated to accommodate his weakening legs. He looked up when they entered, smiled. "How was the opening?" "Perfect. Chaotic. Somebody's child knocked over an entire bookshelf within 5 minutes." Elara kissed his cheek. "Your textile business wants to donate fabric for curtains." "Already arranged, though they insisted on being credited as a supporter, not a donor. Very specific about the distinction." They learned well. Her father took her hand, examined her face with the careful attention of someone who'd watched her grow. "You look happy." "I look tired." "Happy and tired. They're not mutually exclusive." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Your mother would be so proud." "You've said that before." "I'll keep saying it until you believe it." "I believe it. I just don't know if I've earned it yet." "You've changed the world. What more do you need to earn?" "The world's not changed, just shifted slightly. There's still so much work to do." "There will always be work to do. That's not failure. That's life." He settled back in his chair. "Enjoy what you've built. Let yourself feel proud of it. The next fight will still be waiting tomorrow." That night, lying in bed beside Rowan, Elara thought about her father's words, about pride and work, and the difference between transformation and shift. "Do you think we actually changed anything?" she asked the darkness. "Or did we just rearrange the same problems into slightly different configurations?" Rowan was quiet for a moment. "I think we proved change is possible. That's not nothing. A decade ago, workers couldn't testify before Parliament. Women couldn't publish political essays under their own names without being destroyed. Labor reform was a fantasy. Now all of those things exist. Imperfectly, incompletely. But they exist. So we just accept imperfect and incomplete? We accept it as progress and keep pushing for more. What's the alternative? Give up because we didn't fix everything immediately? Sometimes I want to give up, just for a day, just to see what it feels like to stop fighting. Then do it. Take a day off. I'll cover your share of the revolution. She laughed despite herself. You're bad at revolutions. Too willing to compromise. And you're too stubborn to compromise. We balance each other. It was true. These 2 years had taught them how to work together, when to push, when to yield, when to fight separately, and when to combine forces. It wasn't smooth. They argued constantly. But the arguments led to better strategies, stronger positions. I love you, Elara said into the darkness. I love you too, even when you're being exhaustingly principled. Especially when I'm being exhaustingly principled. Fair. Sleep came slowly, the way it always did these days. Too many thoughts, too many plans, too many battles queuing up for tomorrow. But eventually it came. The years that followed brought more victories and more setbacks in roughly equal measure. The Reading Circle network expanded to 20 locations, then 30. They started publishing textbooks written specifically for working-class students, practical, clear, designed for people who had to learn around brutal work schedules. Elara's essays became a book, then another. She lectured at universities, taught at the Reading Circle, debated opponents in public forums. Some people loved her. Many people hated her. She learned to accept both as the cost of visibility. Rowan's workers' cooperative model spread. Other factory owners adopted it. Some genuinely committed to reform, others just trying to avoid the bad publicity of being the last holdout. It didn't matter. The results were the same. Better conditions, safer workplaces, workers with actual power over their own lives. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, the culture shifted. What had been radical became reasonable. What had been impossible became practical. The next generation of workers entered the system expecting 8-hour days and safety standards, not grateful for them, but demanding them as basic rights. 5 years after the wedding, Elara stood in front of 200 students at the Reading Circle's largest location, teaching a class on political organizing. Most of them were young, teenagers and 20-somethings who'd grown up in the world she and Rowan had helped build. Your generation has advantages mine didn't, she told them. You can read. You know your rights. You've seen proof that organizing works. But you also face challenges we never solved. The system adapted, found new ways to exploit, new loopholes, new methods of control. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. So what do we do? Same thing we did. You fight, you organize. You refuse to accept that this is as good as it gets. Elara smiled. And you do it knowing that you won't fix everything, that the world you leave to the next generation will still have problems. But it'll have fewer problems than the world we left to you. That's progress. That's not very inspiring, someone called from the back. Revolution isn't supposed to be inspiring. It's supposed to be effective. Inspiration fades. Commitment lasts. After the class, Victoria found her. Still terrifying students with reality? Someone has to. They keep expecting me to give them easy answers. You could occasionally be optimistic, just to see how it feels. I'm plenty optimistic. I believe they'll succeed where we failed. That's extremely optimistic. Victoria laughed. Fair enough. Come on. We're meeting Rowan at Parliament. Final vote on the education funding bill. The bill had been 3 years in the making. Public funding for schools that would be free to all children regardless of class. It was Elara's latest obsession, the natural extension of everything the Reading Circle had proven. Education couldn't just be charity. It had to be a right. The vote was close, agonizingly close. But when it passed, Elara felt something shift in her chest. Not triumph. Something quieter. Satisfaction, maybe? The sense that all the fighting had actually moved something real. They celebrated quietly that night. Just the three of them, plus Thomas, who'd become a sort of unofficial fourth member of their partnership. He was 23 now, working as an organizer, teaching at the Reading Circle. carrying his sister's memory forward by making sure other sisters didn't die the same way. To public education, Rowan raised his glass, and to the stubborn people who refused to accept that it was impossible. They drank. Victoria left early, printing deadline. Thomas followed soon after, organizing meeting in the morning. Elara and Rowan sat in comfortable silence, the kind that came from years of knowing each other's thoughts. "Are you happy?" he asked eventually. "I'm satisfied. Is that close enough?" "For you? Probably." "What about you?" "I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to do, with exactly who I want to do it with." He took her hand. "So yes, happy." Elara looked at their joined hands, his scarred from factory work he'd taken up to understand what he was asking of workers, hers ink-stained and calloused from years of writing, hands that had built something together, something that would outlast them. "We did all right," she said quietly. "We did extraordinary. Don't exaggerate." "I'm not. Look at what exists now that didn't exist 7 years ago. The reading circles, the reforms, the cooperative model, the education bill. You published 11 books, changed policy in 3 countries, inspired a generation of organizers. That's extraordinary by any measure. We didn't do it alone. No, but we started it. That matters. Maybe it did. Maybe starting was enough. Maybe you didn't have to finish the revolution to claim you'd fought in it." Elara leaned against Rowan's shoulder, feeling the solidity of him. This impossible man who'd rejected perfect women until he found one complicated enough to match him, who'd chosen truth over comfort, who fought beside her instead of for her. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me. For not trying to make me into something easier." "You're welcome. Thank you for the same." Outside, London continued its endless churn, people working, struggling, dreaming, fighting. The same battles in new forms, the same hopes in new voices. The world hadn't been transformed, but it had shifted, opened, created space for possibilities that hadn't existed before. And in one house in a city full of houses, 2 people who'd learned to survive alone were learning to build together. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but honestly, which was all they'd ever really wanted. 10 years after that first meeting, when a desperate matchmaker had walked into a duke's drawing room with nothing but clever words and survival instinct, Elara stood on a stage in front of 3,000 people at the Reading Circle's anniversary celebration. She'd prepared a speech, bullet points about progress and community and the importance of continued vigilance. But standing there, looking at faces that represented everything they'd built, the prepared words felt wrong. So she spoke from the heart instead. "A decade ago, I was drowning, professionally, financially, emotionally. I'd spent my whole life performing competence while hiding capability, shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never designed for me. I thought that was survival. I thought I was being smart." She paused, found Rowan in the crowd. He smiled. "Then I met a man who asked for something I didn't know how to give. Honesty. And I met people who were fighting for something I'd stopped believing in, change. And together, we built this." She gestured to the room, to the people who'd come from 5 countries to celebrate what the Reading Circle had become. "We didn't fix the world. We barely scratched the surface. There's still injustice, still exploitation, still systems designed to crush people who weren't born with advantages. But we proved something important. Those systems can be challenged. They can be changed, not easily, not quickly. But really," her voice strengthened, "you are the proof. Every person in this room who learned to read here, who found community here, who discovered their own power here, you are the proof that impossible just means difficult. That change requires commitment, not miracles. That ordinary people choosing to fight together can move mountains." The applause started before she finished, built until the entire room was standing, shouting, celebrating not just what had been accomplished, but what was still possible. Elara let it wash over her. 10 years of fighting, of building, of refusing to accept defeat. It hadn't been smooth, hadn't been easy. There'd been failures and setbacks and moments of complete despair. But they'd built something real, something that would survive them. That night back home, Elara sat at her desk writing. Not an essay, not a speech. Just thoughts. Reflections on a decade spent trying to change the world. Rowan found her there at midnight, still scribbling. Come to bed. In a minute. I'm almost done. You said that an hour ago. This time I mean it. He read over her shoulder. What are you writing? A letter to my younger self, the one who thought survival meant hiding. What are you telling her? Elara looked at what she'd written, the messy handwriting, the crossed-out phrases, the truth bleeding through inadequate words. That she's braver than she knows, that the fear she carries is valid but not permanent, that choosing to be seen is terrifying and worth it, that love and revolution aren't incompatible, they're complementary, that she should trust herself, trust her anger, trust that the impossible might just be the beginning of possible. That's beautiful. That's honest. There's a difference. Not always. She finished the letter, sealed it in an envelope she'd never send because the recipient was long gone, absorbed into who she'd become. Then she let Rowan lead her to bed. They lay in darkness, hands linked between them. Do you think we'll still be fighting in another 10 years? She asked. Probably, though maybe different battles. I'm tired of fighting. No, you're not. He was right. She wasn't tired of fighting, just tired from it. There was a difference. What happens when we can't fight anymore? She pressed. When we're too old or too tired or too defeated? Then the people we taught will fight. That's what this was always about. Not us winning everything. Us starting something that could continue without us. You're very wise for someone who rejected 7 perfect candidates because they breathed wrong. I rejected them because they weren't you. Everything since then has just been me trying to deserve you. You're ridiculous. You love me anyway. Against all logic and reason, yes. They fell asleep like that. 2 people who'd chosen each other and chosen truth and discovered that the combination was strong enough to build on. The world outside continued spinning. Problems persisted. Injustices remained. The work was far from finished. But in one small corner of London, in one specific moment, 2 people who'd learned to survive by hiding finally rested in the safety of being fully known. And in reading circles across England, in factories with safer conditions, in schools that welcome children regardless of class, in workers who knew their rights and demanded them, in all the small, undeniable ways that change manifested, their choice to fight honestly instead of survive quietly echoed forward. Not as legend, not as fairy tale, but as proof. Proof that impossible was negotiable, that systems could bend, that ordinary people armed with truth and commitment could move the immovable. Proof that love could be radical and practical, vulnerable and fierce, individual and revolutionary all at once. Proof that the world didn't have to be this way, that better was achievable, not perfect, not easy, but real. And in the end, reality was all anyone could really ask for. Honest, complicated, difficult, beautiful reality. The kind worth fighting for, the kind worth building together, the kind that, once achieved, made every impossible moment that led there feel necessary. Not because the journey was smooth, but because the destination was true. And truth, Elara had learned, was the only foundation worth building a life on. Everything else was just performance, and she was done performing.